the cloud. And are we seeing the recording button on? Yes, we are recording. So good morning. Welcome to another virtual day in the woods. There's some pluses and minuses to this virtual version. The big plus is we're getting to meet and have a lot of new people that we're getting introduced to. But today the topic is the fall and rise of bald eagles in Ohio. And our speakers are Brad Perkins and Laura Kearns, and we'll introduce them in just a little bit. But am I sharing the screen still, Brad? Are you still
Yes.
seeing it? So I want to talk a little bit about Day in the Woods. It's a program that started back in 2012, and now it's automated. It didn't want to do that before. Um, but it's something that we coordinate through OSU Extension. But we got lots of partners, including the Ohio Forestry Association and Division of Wildlife, who are represented today by our speakers. But it's a program. Normally, it's a all-day event in the woods with a lunch, and we have speakers and experts, and then we try to get to the field. And the field part is what I miss. It would be so nice to be able to go out with some spotting scopes today. Probably have to have a little smaller crowd to do that, but we have a web page if you want to keep up with what we're doing. And we have 2 more classes that we got scheduled virtually, and then we're kind of on hold to figure out what to do with the rest of the year. We're hoping to do some of that live, but if you're interested in getting updates, you can go to this webpage, u.osu.edu/Southeast Ohio Woods, SE Ohio Woods. And if you subscribe, we post maybe once a week at most. You'll get an email about those posts with registration information and so on. 2 programs we've got coming up that we know of. We typically program on the second Friday of the month. So February 12th, we're going to do Advice from the Woods, and we're going to have, depending on questions that are submitted, we're going to have experts on board to just have some discussions and get your questions answered. The registration is not open for that yet, but it will be shortly. And then on March 12th, Ryan Boyer from NWTF, the National Wild Turkey Federation, myself, and Marnie Tichenal with OSU Extension are going to talk about native trees and shrubs for wildlife. So stay tuned, and again, touch base with that website. We also have Facebook presence. If you want to join, we try to do every Tuesday, Tremendous Tuesday, and launch a tree ID video. So we're at Southeast Ohio Woods there. And I skipped over, let me go back to this. We actually have lots of videos, and Brad's helped with one of these. We have a chainsaw safety series where we have 9 videos on chainsaw safety. We have 30 some videos on tree ID, and then we've been compiling recordings all along this past year that are associated with Day in the Woods. So in total, we have about 80 videos out there. So if you need educational resources, they are there. So with that, again, I'm Dave Apsley. I'm with Ohio State University Extension, and I'm going to turn it over to Brad Perkins.
Okay.
Brad, let me introduce you real quickly. I'm not going to give a big vita, but Brad is the executive director with the Ohio Forestry Association. And we've also got Laura Kearns on. Laura is a wildlife biologist with the ODNR-Division of Wildlife. So take it away, guys.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Dave introduced me there as executive director of the Ohio Forestry Association. And some people might wonder why I'm doing a bald eagle presentation, because it's not direct forestry. But before I was in this position, I developed an interest in bald eagles in Ohio back many years ago. Actually, in the 70s, I was fortunate enough to see a couple of bald eagles fly over the area that I lived on a Boy Scout camp over in Coshocton County. And in the mid 90s, there was actually a nest that showed up there. And so I became a bald eagle nest monitor as a volunteer with the Division of Wildlife's volunteer nest monitoring program in 1996, when I discovered the Wills Creek nest, which was at that time the only real nest inland within about a 100-mile radius. So that's why I'm doing this presentation. I've been working with bald eagle nest monitoring and stuff for 25 years now, and I've done a lot of presentations. So I appreciate everybody coming. This is always an interesting topic. Hopefully you'll learn something today. Some of the things we're going to talk about, you notice I call this the fall and rise of bald eagles in Ohio versus, like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, those kind of things, because, when Ohio was first settled, there were a lot of bald eagles around. They declined to the point that they were, almost extirpated completely from Ohio, and we'll talk about that. later on here. But they have risen back now to the point where they're quite common, and it's been a phenomenal recovery process. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll also talk about identification of bald eagles versus some of the other birds. We'll talk about some of my experiences with rescues of eagle nests that have collapsed, some things like that. So as we go through this, please feel free to use the question and answer or the chat feature to to ask questions so that we can gather those up at the end there and answer any of your questions.
Hey, Brad, before I forget, sorry to interrupt. I did forget to mention chat is a great way to communicate if you have questions about technology. And in fact, let's try it out right now. I'd love to know where you're from. So if you'd put your county, and if you're at a site that has more than one person viewing, just put your county and a space and the number of people at your site in the chat window. And that way we can see if it's working. And then if you have real questions, we really recommend trying to submit them through the question and answer portion, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor both, but question and answer is important. And with this many people on, we might get overwhelmed. We'll try to get them all answered. But if you do the question and answer, you can also look at those questions and upvote them so that somebody else might have the same idea. So with that, sorry to interrupt, Brad, but
oh no, it's quite all right.
Back to you.
So need to make sure we have our processes going here properly. So so one of the things I'll let you know here, show you a lot of pictures today of eagles, and with the exception of just a couple, these are all pictures that I've been fortunate enough to take throughout my time here. And I'm a very amateur photographer, so I'm not one of those guys out there with the 2-foot long lenses and stuff that cost thousands of dollars. So for the positive side, if you see any of these pictures that you like, remember that they're taken by a very amateur photographer with cameras that range from $100 to $500. Okay, so anybody could get pictures like this. And if you see some pictures that aren't so good, well, remember they were taken by an amateur photographer, so don't give me too much flack for that. So anyhow, Dave, I'm going to ask you to bring up that first poll question here. So I always like to find out how many people have actually, that's the second one, if you'll bring up the first one.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that, Brad. I'm not sure.
Your little drop down there beside the polling thing, the little drop down should bring up the second one.
Got it. Now I see it.
The first one.
I'll go click on the first one. How about that?
There you go. So my question is, have you seen a bald eagle in the wild? And answer as many of those as apply. Either no, yes in Ohio, or yes somewhere other than Ohio. And if you've seen them both in Ohio and somewhere other than Ohio, that'd be interesting to know too. So boy, the numbers are climbing for what we've seen in Ohio. That's phenomenal.
And the audience caught on quick. They know what they're doing out there.
They know what know what they're doing for sure. So while the people are continuing to answer this question, so one of the things that I do want to mention here, right now the numbers are climbing. We've got almost 160 responses that have seen a bald eagle in Ohio, while we only have 6 people that have said no, they haven't seen a bald eagle in the wild here in Ohio, or at all. And when I first would do presentations like this, let's say 15, 20 years ago, I would have a group of people, maybe 50 in a room, and I'd be doing a presentation like this. And if I asked that same question, I would only get 2 or 3 people out of 50 that had actually seen a bald eagle in the wild in Ohio. So to see here that, right now it's 164 to 6, that's phenomenal. And it finally hit about 7 or 8 years ago. I did a presentation for a small group, only 35 or 40 people, but that was the first group I had run into that nobody had not seen a bald eagle in Ohio. Everybody in that group had seen one. So that was the first time that had happened. So, well, hey, appreciate everybody's responses on that. I'll end that poll now, but as you can see there, 167 people said yes, 7 said no, and 33 have seen them somewhere outside of Ohio. And I've been fortunate enough to see bald eagles in many states outside of Ohio. So You know, as we look at some pictures here of bald eagles in Ohio, let me click back on here so my slides start to advance. You know, maybe you've been fortunate enough to see one like this. It was still looking a little damp after you'd apparently missed catching a fish in the river. Maybe you've seen one that was a little, you were a little too close and he was screaming at you. Maybe you saw one in a more of a protective mode. May have just caught a fish and had it underneath there and was protecting it. Maybe you've seen one in an unusual place, like on a sandbar here at a gravel pit, or just perched along the river someplace. So obviously, you know, a lot of eagles can be seen in a lot of places. Maybe you've had the opportunity here to see a pair of eagles together. This is a fairly young pair. The eagle on the left there, you see, still doesn't have the full yellow beak and the full white head and tail. They're eating on a deer carcass. Maybe you've been fortunate enough to see one in a nest, and if you happen to have a good pair of binoculars or a good spotting scope, maybe you're able to get in and look really closely at it and see all the details of the eagles in the nest, which is always a cool opportunity. So at this time, I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, what an eagle is, some of their lifestyle happenings here. So some facts about bald eagles. Color, the adults are dark brown with a white head and tail. The immature eagles are a mottled brown, and we'll look at some pictures of immature eagles later on. From a size standpoint, weight is in the 10 to 12 pound range with a height of 32 to 36 inches. So thinking about the size of eagles, I want to show you this picture. You don't often get to see a male and female perched together. And in most cases, the adult female eagle is about 20% larger than the adult male. But these birds are so big that if you see one by itself, it's almost impossible to tell whether you're looking at the male or the female. But if you get the opportunity to see them together. Now, we actually had a question raised to us a couple of days ago about identifying you know, the difference between male and female, and was asked about a report somebody had seen about the beak size being an indicator. And there is a very complicated formula that I have seen for measuring the size of an eagle's beak. But it's not just the length of the beak, and it's not just the depth of the beak or the width. It's a very sophisticated calculation that you'd almost have to have the eagle in hand in order to do that. So, and it wouldn't be 100% accurate, but if you were able to use that formula, you'd get pretty close. If you get to see the size here, the females are, you know, most of the time are going to be bigger. Probably the only way to 100% tell would actually be to do some genetic testing. So food. So fish is the most common food for bald eagles. That's why most of their nests and stuff are built around water. But they also will eat waterfowl. They'll eat small mammals. They'll eat carrion, which is dead meat, roadkill. So this is something we'll talk about a little later on. But you know, I've seen them with anything from groundhogs to squirrels to turtles. There was a nest. I can't remember exactly where this was in Ohio, that when the biologist went in to kind of check out the inside of the nest looking for, you know, the fish skeletons and stuff to see what they were eating, and the entire nest was full of turtle shells. So obviously they had developed a really good affinity for turtle soup, apparently. So thinking about fish being their main diet, here's a picture of an immature eagle up on Lake Erie with a carp, probably somebody's, you know, koi fish that had been released someplace around there and developed that bright orange look there. So wasn't hard at all to see the food he was eating here, but that came right out of Lake Erie. It was up in the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge where we saw this. So mating, you know, eagles are pretty much monogamous. They'll mate for life, although, you know, occasionally I think there's the occasional divorce in the eagle population. Obviously, if one of the adults, you know, gets killed, dies for some reason, then there will be a mate change there. But otherwise, they normally breed for life. They normally actually start the breeding process in late February to early March, especially here in Ohio. So right now, it's more in the kind of not a lot of activity right now. In late November, December, their instincts were triggered to start doing some nest building, and that trigger is going to probably hit here again in late January. So late January through early February, they'll actually start building onto their nests again because they use those nests year after year. So we will see that taking place. So when they do start breeding, they normally lay 2 eggs, sometimes 1, sometimes 3. Seen a few nests in Central Ohio that 3 has been the dominant number. They've been very successful. I think that has a lot to do with the food source in the area, but it's usually just 2 eggs. It takes 35 days to incubate those eggs before they hatch. And then it takes 10 to 13 weeks for those eagles to grow to the point where they are strong, big enough and strong enough to fly and can actually leave the nest. And they won't resemble a full-grown adult with the full white head and tail for usually 4 to 5 years. In the wild, the life expectancy of a bald eagle is 15 to 20 years. There have been some in captivity that have lived 25 or longer. And the mortality rates are usually highest in the first year. This is a fairly old publication here on the facts that said 50 to 80%. I don't think it's that high now. I think as the recovery has come up, I think the mortality rate is not quite that high anymore. So we talked briefly about nests. I told you they were used year after year. So what they do is they just keep adding on to the size of the nest. It doesn't get any deeper, it just gets thicker. The nests themselves are actually fairly shallow. But there was one nest up in Vermilion, Ohio that actually reached a size of 12 feet high, 8 feet wide, and weighed 2 tons. I'll show you this is a picture of a picture. This nest was active back in the early 1900s. I think collapsed out of this tree in the 1920s. So I'm old, but not old enough to have taken the actual picture. So this is actually a picture of a picture, but it was known as the Great Vermilion Nest, and at that time was known to be the largest in the U.S. Since that time, there have actually been a couple of nests in Florida in the last 5 to 10 years. Another one that has been figured to be about 2 tons, about the size of this one, and another one that's estimated to be close to 3 tons. This one, they actually knew how big it was because when it finally collapsed, they actually gathered all the sticks and stuff up and put them in a truck and weighed it. It's kind of interesting. So the last thing we'll talk about here on the bald eagle facts is the residency. So the adult eagles are pretty territorial. So once they've set up a territory, they're gonna hang around that territory as much as they can. So they usually mate in Ohio year round. If the rivers start to freeze up and they can't get to their favorite food, which is fish, then you often see them then eating on mammals, especially roadkill. Some of the immature birds will obviously migrate around, find their own territories and stuff, and so a lot of the immatures will migrate south in the fall and maybe up back north in the spring, and usually in the middle of the winter, if there's some open water in the central and southern part of Ohio, you will see large gatherings of immature eagles. So I mentioned earlier that I was an Eagle Watch volunteer with the Division of Wildlife Volunteer Nest Monitoring Program. So I'll talk a little bit about that and what we did as Eagle Watch volunteers. So I got started into this in 1995. A pair of eagles nested in near Adams Mills in Coshocton County. Now this pair of eagles were known because these eagles actually had been banded when they were young in nests off of Lake Erie, and they both actually had solar-powered radio transmitters that were strapped onto their back, little antenna that went down by their tail. And so when they were up flying, the wildlife biologist could actually get out their radio telemetry equipment and could identify both of these eagles. And so that first nesting pair in Central Ohio, and it really was the only nest within a 100-mile radius. Everything else was either up on Lake Erie, over on Lake St. Mary's or Pymatuning Lake, some of the big lakes and the western basin of Lake Erie. So this really was the first inland nest in Ohio. But the female from this nest was actually 6 years old when it finally nested, and the male was a young 3-year-old male. Interesting thing about the male, he also had what we call patagial tag, which was a green tag on its wing that had been put on when it was an eaglet. And we'll discuss later here how it took place. So they actually knew, where these eagles had hatched from earlier. And they knew the female had actually been hanging out in the Wills Creek area of Coshocton, Muskingum County there for 3 years prior to a mate showing up that they actually could start a nest. So that nest, they nested 1 year, they raised one young eaglet, and then it was in a really poor tree. It's in a crooked old maple tree. The tree collapsed, the nest collapsed out of it. And so knowing that they would probably re-nest somewhere in the area, I spent the entire winter searching that whole area, both on the Muskingum River and Wills Creek, and finally found the nest where they rebuilt on private property at the end of a dead-end road, right at the confluence of Wills Creek and Muskingum. So found that nest, got with the Division of Wildlife, we set up a volunteer crew, and this is what we did as volunteers. So we're set up here, and we're like probably 500 yards away from the nest. Because there were so few nests in the state of Ohio, they didn't want anybody getting close to them and disturbing them. So we would watch through spotting scopes. And so that's looking through a spotting scope. It's kind of hard to see the nest, but if you look close, you can barely see it in the top of a big tree right there. But if you had a spotting scope, you could really look much closer into the nest, and you could actually watch all the activity that was taking place within the nest. So the thing that we would look for as a volunteer, so on this picture, you can see down to the right of the eagle, there's actually some food laying there. So we were always looking to see, okay, are they bringing, do they have food at the nest? In this picture, this adult eagle is packing some grass and stuff kind of around it to protect either the wind from getting on the eggs that it's sitting on, or probably in this case, very, very tiny young eaglets that have been born. And as she's protecting them, gathering in some insulation to pack around them. And one of the things I'll mention here is the male and female eagles both take turns with the incubation process and also with the bringing food into the nest and feeding process. So in fact, in some nests, and we mentioned earlier, usually the female is a larger bird than the male, making them possibly a better and stronger hunter. We've actually seen a lot of nests where the adult male spends more time on the nest while the female is actually spending more time out hunting. But they do share those duties. So we would also be looking to see when young eaglets hatched. Now, in this picture, if you look down to the far left, and I'll bring it in a little closer, there is a tiny eaglet that is probably only a couple of days old. They're just a tiny little white fuzzball, and that's the first thing we're looking for is when those eaglets finally hatch and see if they're healthy. And it's funny, when you're watching these eagles on these nests as a monitor, you really develop the ability to watch when they're getting down on the eggs, when they're actually getting up and rolling the eggs. Even if you can't see every little detail through your scope, you can see when they start feeding. Sometimes you can tell that they're feeding more than one. So those are the things that we're looking for, all those different activities. This picture here, we can see that we're always looking to make sure they're bringing food in to feed them. And the adult here on the left actually has a fish in its talons as it's coming into the nest. And you can see the two young eaglets in the nest. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a moment here for a brief commercial interruption. So this picture, some of you may have seen this picture before on a book called A Hope for Wings. So Al Parker, who's a professor up at Zane State College in Zanesville, Ohio, was very involved in raptor rehabilitation and raptor introduction, and did a lot of hacking of bald eagles over in Indiana back in the 80s and 90s. And he wrote a book just a couple of years ago called A Hope for Wings. And I was fortunate that he'd seen one of my presentations. He contacted me and asked if he could use a few of my pictures to help with his book. So I actually feel very honored to have made the front and back covers of Al Parker's book here. But one of the things that Al really talks a lot about here is the hacking process with bald eagles that he was involved in, where they would take young eaglets, raise them with as little direct human interaction as possible, but then release them in an area where maybe they would start to expand the recovery of the bald eagle. So that's not an area that I had a lot of expertise in. Al did, and so this is a really interesting book to read if you get the opportunity. And I saw it today on Amazon for about $12. It's a good book, so told Al I'd throw him in a spot here. So now back to our regularly scheduled program. As we saw, that adult eagle was bringing that fish in. This picture here just shows a little better slide there of you can actually see the fish in his talons as he's bringing it in. And then of course, mom was there on the nest, and she immediately started tearing the fish apart and feeding the young eaglets. So the other thing, we would spend that next 10 to 13 weeks watching these eaglets grow, making sure again that they were staying healthy, that all of that was coming out fine. In this shot, I'd like to point out, you see some whitewash over here on the left side of this tree on the left side. It's one of those interesting phenomenon with eagles. When it's time for them to use the bathroom, you can always tell when it's ready to happen, because they turn around and they back up to the edge of the nest, right to the edge. Sometimes you think they're going to fall off, and then they'll shoot a whitewash stream about 10 feet out in the air behind them. Usually that keeps it out of the nest, so the nest is much cleaner that way. But all of the tree limbs and stuff in the surrounding area will have a whitewash on them. Actually, this poor little guy in the center of the picture here looks like he's actually got a little bit of his whitewash on his own beak there, so he must not have got out of the way completely. So again, we see here as the eaglets are growing, getting bigger, eventually they'll get to the size where they'll be able to start spreading their wings and work to the point where they actually fledge and can start flying. So as I was a monitor, we looked at every aspect of what was going on at those nests, and we actually turned in these reports to the wildlife biologists up at the Crane Creek Wildlife Research Station. And the real reason for that was in the early days of the recovery of the bald eagle in Ohio, there were so few nests that they wanted volunteers watching each and every nest in case a problem arose. And in the early part of Ohio's recovery, every nest had a group of volunteers that monitored these nests almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day. They would have people that would monitor these nests. And what that allowed for then was if something happened, if one of the adults didn't come back to the nest for hours and hours on end, and the other adult had to leave the nest to try to go out for food, this is a bad sign, because when eaglets are young, it takes about 4 weeks before they can thermoregulate their own body temperature. So they either have to have an adult there to keep them warm or to keep them cool by shading them. So it's almost impossible for an individual eagle to raise eaglets if one of the other adults, would get killed or die or whatever. So by having monitors watching these nests, they could very quickly, make a phone call and say, hey, we've had a problem here. Something's going on. One of the adults must be, have been killed. And the biologist could actually come in, could rescue those eaglets. They would know exactly how old they were because of the monitoring, and be able to put them in another nest with maybe an eagle that only had one young one that would be of the same age, and then they could get raised that way. And the program was really so good that even some of the surrounding states like Indiana, if they had a problem, they knew that that Ohio had nests that we knew everything about, that they could coordinate with. So it was kind of a good program. Eventually, these paper copies that we would mail or fax in went to a digital online monitoring system. So one of the other neat things was during the early stages, they would love to come in and actually go up into the nest, get the eaglets, and put bands on them. So here's a couple of biologists looking at the nest down at Wills Creek. This was in about a 5-foot diameter sycamore tree. Tree was over 100 feet tall. The nest was about 85 feet up, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to climb up there. But they did. They take a bag up with them, and they would put the eaglets in a bag and lower them down to the biologists on the ground. And again, I have to apologize for these pictures. These were, obviously taken back in the 90s before I had better cameras. But here they have one of the young eaglets, and they're taking talon measurements. They draw blood from them to check for different diseases and parasites, and to do the tests on male and female. You'll see some blue gauze wrapped around the talons, because the talons on these things would go right through you. Very, very interesting. I mean, they're huge. So they'd wrap gauze around the talons to protect the guys that were handling them. You see at the bottom of the frame there, you'll see some red and silver bands. So that's the bands they actually would, they're numbered. They would put those identifying bands on the talons, on the ankles of the eagles. And that way, if they were ever found later on, that you could actually get the numbers on those, they would be able to tell exactly where those eaglets came from. And if it was a good day, and the eaglets were not being feeling too stressed or whatever, you actually could get a photo opportunity with an eaglet that was big enough it wasn't going to harm them, but still too young to fly. And while that was going on, the biologist that was up at the nest would actually be going through the nest contents to see what type of food it had been getting, see if there was any issues and stuff there. So they did this quite a bit back in the 90s and into the early 2000s. They really stopped doing most of the bandings after that for a couple of reasons. One, it was very dangerous, climbing up into a tree that high on a nest that, if you stepped onto it wrong or one of the branches wasn't strong enough, you could actually collapse the whole nest. So it was dangerous for the climbers. It could be dangerous for the birds. But also, as the recovery became stronger, they didn't feel the need to do this as much. But they also weren't finding enough dead eagles where they actually could identify them with the bands and stuff to really get a lot of really good data from it. So other than the occasional public banding as a way to educate people and stuff, they really quit doing this in the early to mid 2000s. So we call this the fall and the rise. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons for the eagle's decline in Ohio. So one of the biggest reasons was pesticides like DDT and dieldrin. DDT was banned in 1972. So what DDT did, it didn't kill the eagles directly, but as the pesticide would get into the water systems, build up in the fatty tissues of fish, the eagles would eat the fish and then it would build up in their systems. What it did then was when they would lay their eggs, the eggs would not be thick enough to withstand the adult eagles sitting on them. So at that point, they would just bust. So it wasn't killing the eagles directly, but it was keeping them from reproducing. They would lay eggs, the eggs would break, we had no eagles being born. So banning it in 1972 really helped start the process. Loss of habitat. We think about from the forestry side of things, Ohio was 90 to 95% forested in the early 1800s. So there was lots of super canopy trees for them to build their nests in. By 1900, we were down to 10% forested. And so a lot of the trees along the rivers and lakes and stuff had been completely cut out, turned into agricultural fields. So loss of habitat was another big reason for the decline. Water pollution. If we think about it, and I like to use the example of those of you that know about the Cuyahoga River that caught on fire back in the 70s because it had so much pollution of oil and chemicals and stuff on it. As we get into the recovery phase now, we know now that there's actually eagle nests on the Cuyahoga River in the area where these fires were. So what a phenomenal turnaround. And also hunting pressures. We think back in the 18 and early 1900s, it was fine to hunt eagles, and a lot of people thought they were getting their livestock and their chickens and that kind of thing. So, or they just wanted the white feathers. So hunting pressures was another reason for the eagle's decline. So we'll talk a little bit here about some of the population of eagles in Ohio and the nests and stuff. And after a couple slides here, I'm going to call Laura Kearns in here to give me a hand with this, as she's got some information here. But we can see here, we did midwinter eagle surveys, which basically once a weekend in January, we'd be picked out by the Division of Wildlife, and they would say, hey, all of the volunteers and the wildlife employees would go out and count as many eagles as you can and kind of the locations they were in. Now, if you look to the far left of this graph, you can see that back in the 1970s and 1980s, they might only find 5, 6, 7 eagles in the entire state. And by the time you get to the far right side of the graph, we're up into the 5, 6, 700 range. And at that point, there was probably some overlap in people counting and that kind of thing. So it's not an exact count, but it gave us a good indication of what was happening with the bald eagle population. Starting in 2009, they started doing those surveys. Then were being done by aerial samples. And again, Laura will talk here in just a minute. We also talk about eagle nests in Ohio. So again, we go back into the late 70s, 1979, 1980 range. There were only 4 nests in Ohio. Those were all on the western basin of Lake Erie. I think up around the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge, McKee Marsh, up in that area, kind of between Sandusky and Toledo. But the interesting was, those weren't just the only 4 nests in Ohio. At that time, those were the only bald eagle nests on the entire Great Lakes ecosystem. Now, that's a huge area. That means there weren't any bald eagle nests in Michigan, Wisconsin, even on the Canadian side of that at that time. So those were the only nests at that time. And when the recovery started, Division of Wildlife never thought we would see more than 100 eagle nests in the state of Ohio. You can see by the chart here that we actually crossed that in the early 2000s. And as you see then, where it hit up around 200 there in 2009, 2010, it looks like it stagnated there. Well, actually, it didn't really stagnate. The bald eagle monitoring program, volunteer monitoring program, was basically disbanded in that area. And so the division quit doing very, very detailed, individual nest counts by volunteers. So we didn't, it was still going up on that linear projection. We just weren't sure that it was going up. But at this time, I'm going to ask Laura Kearns to step in and talk about how they do some of the midwinter eagle surveys now and some of the other nest survey data they've done. Laura?
All right. Thanks, Brad. So, I've been with the division since 2014. So have been, helping out with the eagle surveys since that period of delisting. So on an annual basis, we've continued to do the annual midwinter count, and I'll give some additional numbers on that here in a minute. And that is actually done across the country. And they've been able to help keep track of the bald eagle population through that survey. So it's still important that we're participating in that. And then we also do an aerial nest survey on an annual basis. And this is just like Brad was mentioning, it's not the entire state, it's just some areas that are set areas that we sample. 2 of those areas, they're 10 square mile blocks in different parts of the state. 2 of those we do every year. And then 3 others are done every 3 years on a rotating basis. So we're going back to the same areas, counting what nests are within that area. And then also we look at productivity, how many young are being produced in those nests. So, so just an update on the midwinter eagle numbers. So this is from 1999 through 2020, so last winter. And we do these in January still. But you can see 2009, that was one of our lower years for the count. But you can see there was a lot of fluctuation. Again, it kind of depends on winter conditions because some of these birds are coming in from other areas. If it's a mild winter, they might be staying further north. If it's a hard winter, we might see more influx from birds further north, or we might just be seeing a lot of our resident birds sticking around. It kind of depends, but I guess the thing I want to point out is that since really 2014, we've just seen this phenomenal increase in the number of eagles on the midwinter count. So the blue represents the immature eagles. So that's any bird that doesn't have the white head and the white tail. Brad will talk a little bit more about the plumage here in a minute, but you can see the immature numbers have really skyrocketed, and we've seen a subsequent increase in the adults as well. So again, good indication that we're getting a lot of good reproduction in the population, and that adults are continuing to, that those numbers are continuing to persist as well. So again, we're getting upwards of 500 plus eagles on those midwinter surveys. So last year we did something a little bit different because we hadn't done a nest census. So try to count all the nests in the state for a while. We decided it was good to give that a try again. And we had some new technologies that have helped with this. So we now have a reporting website where the public can report sightings of bald eagles. We used to take information from the public, but it's much easier for the public to access things through this reporting website. So anyway, we put out an announcement to have people report nests, and we got over 2,500 reports from the public, which was phenomenal. Certainly there weren't that many nests in the end, but some of those were duplicate reports. Some of those, sometimes people just reported sightings of bald eagles. But from this, we were able to confirm and locate over 700 eagle nests in the state. And so that was just phenomenal. We certainly didn't expect that. In Brad's graph just a little bit ago, he showed we were estimating around 350 nests. So it's basically double what we thought. So in the map here, you can see the distribution of those eagle nests across the state. And so they're color coded. So the red counties are the ones with higher numbers and the blue or lower numbers. But I guess, some interesting things to point out here are, again, Brad mentioned those 4 eagle nests we had back in the late 70s up at Ottawa. That area still continued to be really a hot spot for eagles, and there's great habitat up there, a lot of wetland habitat. They're right next to the lake. There's a lot of great trees that provide good nesting sites. And the eagles we found are not as sensitive to having other eagles around. Their nests within really short, only a few hundred feet away. So it's just been phenomenal to see that increasing density up there. But the other exciting thing was just seeing the expansion of bald eagle nests throughout the state. And now we have documented nests in 85 of 88 counties in Ohio. So it was, when Brad did the poll earlier and it was showing how a lot of you have seen an eagle here in Ohio, this is why, because we're getting these nests all over the state. So just some fun facts looking at statistics of bald eagle nests throughout the state. So just for this graph here, don't worry about, or the map here, don't worry about thinking about it too hard, but just it's showing the general distribution of nests throughout the state. The red dots are nests that are on private land, and we found that there are approximately 565 nests on private land, and then the light blue dots are nests on public land. So that includes Division of Wildlife properties, of which there were 43 nests on division properties, but the rest were on properties like state forests, state nature preserves, state parks. So, that public land is also important for providing nesting habitat for the eagles. And then overall, there were 621 nests north of I-70. So again, Northern Ohio has the bulk of eagle populations, and they're slowly trickling into Southern Ohio. Okay, go ahead, Brad, next slide. So another interesting thing was just looking at eagle nests by watershed. So we have 2 major watersheds in the state, the Lake Erie watershed, so the top third of the state there. And then the Ohio River is the southern part of the state. And it's almost a 50-50 split. We're getting there. Lake Erie watershed, almost 400 nests within that watershed. And then the Ohio River, 316 nests. But then this map here is kind of broken down other major watersheds throughout the state, and where we see the eagle nests. Again, 322 eagle nests in the western Lake Erie Basin. Again, it's a testament to how important that area is in Ohio for eagles. But the second highest watershed was the Muskingum watershed area, 112 eagle nests. So again, a lot of reservoirs in that part of Ohio, a lot of rivers, so important habitat for eagles. And then the third highest was the Scioto watershed, 77 eagle nests. Scioto River is really important. It's a huge, huge river as you get south of Columbus, and a lot of eagles taking advantage of that habitat. So just kind of neat to see how eagle nests are spread throughout those different watersheds. And it's also a testament, like Brad was talking about earlier, how water quality has been really important in the recovery as well. As we've cleaned up our rivers and our environment, that's been beneficial to the eagles. Next. So then, earlier Brad was talking about the nest numbers, and so really this is just taking a graph he showed earlier. I'm tacking on the number from the 2020 nest census, and there are, so basically in 2007, this federal delisting, we had about a little under 200 nests in the state. 2012, we were a little above that, right around 200. And then we stopped doing the really detailed monitoring of all the nests in the state in 2012. But then that we've been estimating. So those orange dots represent those estimated nest numbers from the annual survey that we were doing. But then again, we found in 2020 with the nest census that we were getting over 700 nests in the state. And again, that is not by no means a perfect number. When you get that many nests, I'm sure that we miss some, and nests are also kind of moving this year. I'm sure there's going to be some nests that have failed last year. They've fallen out of a nest and are going to be in a new location, or so again, none of these surveys are perfect, but they give us a general idea. And the really important thing is just to continue to see that increase in eagles and to know that they have just made this incredible recovery back from where they were in the late 70s. And hopefully we can continue to see that kind of health in the population. All right, back to you, Brad.
Okay, thank you, Laura. A lot of good information. And for everybody that's on the webinar here, Laura and I will both be around here for questions here at the end as we wrap up here in a little while. So continuing with Laura's path of how things have been recovering here in Ohio, so we look at this last chart here of the number of eaglets per nest in Ohio. So you have to have a certain number of eaglets being born because the ones that don't make it to actually build a population. And on this chart, you see a red line at about the 0.7. And so that red line really indicates the amount of surviving eaglets per nest that you have to have in order to maintain a population. And you can see that during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we were below that line on the chart. And that's why the eagle population was continuing to go down. So it wasn't until the late 70s going into the 80s that we actually started getting above that number. And so if you get slightly above that number, you can kind of maintain your population. But if you start getting significantly above one surviving eaglet per nest, you actually start building population. So you can see there from about 1991 on, we've been in that one or above range from that time till now. So that's really why that population number and the number of nests just keep skyrocketing. So going back, just thinking about some of the map chart there that Laura showed earlier about how many eagle nests there are in the state now. So this is back in 1996 when I first started monitoring the nest in Coshocton County. The green colored counties here are the only counties in the state at that time that actually had a confirmed bald eagle nest in it. By the time we get up to the year 2000, you can see how they've spread out some. And again, thinking about the river systems and stuff that Laura mentioned earlier, Coshocton is in that Muskingum River Valley area. And so that area from Knox County, Coshocton going towards Guernsey, that area there has several river systems in it. And you can see the river systems coming from Lake Erie down through the central part of the state, down along the Scioto. And so as we move on to 2005, these eagles continue to expand down the river and lake systems to where by 2005, that's the number of counties that had eagles. By 2009, it had really expanded to where all those green counties had confirmed eagle nests in it. We've now got almost the entire Muskingum River Shed and the Scioto are filled in. By 2012, there were 62 counties that had nests in them. So there were a couple more that would be added to this map here, but I didn't have those exact counties when I built this. And of course, by the last chart that you saw that Laura had up there, there are now only 3 counties in the entire state that don't have confirmed eagle nests on them. And those are clear at the bottom of the state along the Ohio River. And it's taken a while for the eagles to really migrate that far down and start populating along the Ohio River, but they have. So I would imagine that within the next 2 to 5 years, we'll probably see those 3 counties have nests in them. Pretty phenomenal comeback. So, we talked about the reason for the eagles decline. We still have some protection for Ohio's eagles. We'll talk a little bit about that. The Eagle Protection Act really protects bald and golden eagles. And it's a fairly detailed and act that provides really serious protection for them. So, for instance, if you were walking around out in the woods near an eagle nest and you found one of those beautiful white tail feathers on the ground, leave it there. And if you in fact got caught with that eagle feather and didn't have some type of special permit to have it, it could be jail time and some severe fines. The Eagle Protection Act really deters people from having any part of a nest, any part of the eagle, no taking of eagles, no intentional disturbing of eagles. So there's really a lot to this Eagle Protection Act. Also, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act still provides some protections for that, although there's been some issues with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in legislation here recently that could diminish its ability to help protect them. And Laura mentioned the Endangered Species Act, where actually they were delisted federally in 2007 because of how great the recovery has been, and then they were delisted from the state's endangered species list in 2012. So again, we still have protection for Ohio's eagles. You still can't hunt them, you can't disturb them, you can't interrupt their mating processes, you can't interrupt their nesting processes. And really the Bald Eagle Protection Act is what really provides the most protection. So we've seen this phenomenal recovery, but do we still have some concerns today? Well, sure, there's still concerns. Water pollution is still a concern. Again, I like to point out that there are now bald eagles nesting on the Cuyahoga River where the river caught on fire back in the 70s. That's a testament to the cleanup that our water systems have had over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Loss of habitat is still a concern. As we see a lot of, especially a lot of your farmers that like to, when crop prices get high, they like to farm as much ground as they possibly can. So oftentimes they're clearing the trees along the rivers to give themselves, a little bit more, area to crop, but also to get some of the shade off of their crops. And this is eliminating some of this what I'll call super canopy nesting trees that the eagles like to use. They like a large tree that's usually the tallest one in the woodlot or in the area. They prefer trees with nice, open branching structures. In fact, I did an article a few years ago for the Ohio Woodland Journal about sycamores and the bald eagle, and I find most of the areas that I'm in that very large sycamore trees are the preferred tree for them. But loss of habitat is still a concern. West Nile virus does affect raptors, so bald eagles can be affected by West Nile virus, which is transmitted by different mosquitoes. Also lead poisoning, and I'm not talking about being shot with lead shot, but lead poisoning where this can happen most is with eagles that have eaten on, let's say, a dead deer that someone has shot but didn't recover. The eagle starts to feed on that and gets some of that lead in its crop, and we'll talk here later about some issues with that. But also collisions is another leading cause of death, and that's collisions with cars, with trucks, with trains, and with things like power lines. So, if you get an eagle that's diving at a high rate of speed trying to catch a bird or maybe fighting off another intruding eagle or whatever, and they run into a power line that they don't see till the last second, it can take a wing off. So collisions, because we know that they like to eat carrion, especially in the wintertime when maybe they can't get to their fish because the rivers are frozen. We've had people come around a corner and there's an eagle sitting on a dead squirrel or something, and they've run into them with their car. So as the population gets bigger, we'll see more of these collisions. Little cartoon here I thought was funny. Shows the eagle using DDT to kill the mosquito so he doesn't get West Nile virus. So, which is the worst of two evils, I guess. So I mentioned lead poisoning. So here's a case where here's an adult eagle sitting on a dead deer, and you can see a kind of a hole here in the side of the deer where it started to eat, and that's probably where it was shot with a lead slug, and this can become a problem. And so one of the areas we'll talk about that is I'm going to talk just shortly here or briefly here about a couple of rescue attempts that I've been involved in or rescues that I've been involved in. The first one happened up by Mohawk Dam in northern Coshocton County. I received a telephone call from a landowner late on an evening. I think it was a Friday evening, saying that they had an eagle in the area and they'd heard that I worked with eagles, so they got my number and called me. And they thought something was wrong with this eagle because they could get too close to it. It was on the ground and they were able to just get too close to it, and it really wasn't flying. It was just kind of hobbling away. So I contacted the Ohio Division of Wildlife, one of the guys from Woodbury Wildlife area, and asked him if he could meet us up there the next morning. And so we did. It was on an ugly 40-degree November pouring down rain kind of day. But we got with the landowners had called, got with Division of Wildlife personnel, and we found this eagle. And this picture, most of my pictures I take are with a zoom camera, so I'm not very close to them. I actually was standing within 5 feet of this eagle when I took this picture. This was back in like 2007. And this eagle was obviously sick. He really couldn't fly. So we gathered the eagle up. So this picture here, that's me in the yellow raincoat. You could it was pouring down rain. Sean Murphy from Division of Wildlife. So we captured the eagle, got it into a turkey box to keep it secure and safe, and eventually got it to the Ohio Bird Sanctuary, where they started giving it intravenous fluids and stuff. But unfortunately, this eagle did not make it. It did die a few days later. They ran toxicology tests on it, and it had 3 times the level of lead in its blood system that was lethal to eagles. Now, look, comical thing about this picture, you see the guy in the background kind of running into the woods, you know. This was the landowner that was with us, and I like to joke about that. I don't know if Mother Nature was calling. He had to run to the woods. I wasn't sure what was going on here. And so I was giving this presentation last March for a group at the Tiverton Institute. I was joking about that in the picture when all of a sudden a guy in the back in the audience spoke up and went, "I was just trying to get out of your way." Hilarious, because it was actually the landowner himself. I hadn't seen him since we did this rescue 13 years previous. I hadn't seen him come into the room behind me because I was sitting in the front waiting to do my presentation. But so yeah, he and his wife were in the crowd. It was kind of a funny moment during the presentation, but he was just trying to get out of the way of the picture taking, which my wife was taking the pictures. But anyway, yeah, sadly enough, this bird did not make it. We knew where this bird had been hatched originally, up in Killdeer Plains in the old goose tub nest. So, you know, it could have been that it had actually eaten a lot of ducks from Killdeer Plains when it was young, that had picked a lot of lead shot from duck hunting out of the swamps and stuff. It could have got the lead that way, but more than likely it got it in this area from eating on a dead deer carcass. We had another disaster, the Killbuck South nest. This was a first-year nest in the Killbuck swamp, just outside the little village of Killbuck. And we actually went up to monitor the nest. We couldn't find the nest from our monitoring location. And we found out by contacting some Division of Wildlife personnel that it showed up about the same time, that they had gotten a report from a local landowner that the entire tree had collapsed in the middle of the swamp. So we went in with Division of Wildlife, with a local landowner there, searched all through this nest that had collapsed right into the middle of the swamp, into the water. Unfortunately, we took out two dead eaglets that obviously were way too small to have, you know, flown the nest when it collapsed. They drowned. So, you know, one of those bad things that happens when you're trying to do these things. It was kind of a sad day. These eaglets then were sent by Division of Wildlife to the Bald Eagle Repository in Madison, Wisconsin, which is where, with the eagle being our national symbol, that's where all dead eagles go to be buried, or whatever they do with them at the Bald Eagle Repository in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, fortunately, not all my activities with rescue attempts have been for naught. Here's a case where in 2008 or 9, I can't remember exactly which year, we had a nest went down in Plainfield, wondering whether the eaglets could be saved. So here was a nest of that, picture of that nest prior to its collapsing. It was a pretty big nest. But I got a call again on an evening from a landowner saying, "Hey, the nest doesn't look right. There's something looks wrong with the nest." And again, you got to keep in mind, we didn't get close to these nests. We were always hundreds of yards away. So at lunchtime that day, I ran out from work with my spotting scope and took a close look at it and went, well, yeah, 3/4 to 80% of the nest is gone. It's no longer there. One of the support branches had broke out. So this was out in the middle of the swamp. And so I immediately called the Division of Wildlife down in Athens, which covered that area, to say, what do you want us to do, or what can you guys do? And they're like, well, all of our personnel were doing some type of educational events that day, but they didn't have anybody that could go in. And this was in, this happened in July, a lot of rainstorms. Wills Creek Dam had been closed, and so the water levels in the swamp were coming up. Now the eaglets were, because it was in July, were pretty big, so we thought maybe there was a chance they survived. So the Division of Wildlife asked me and my wife if we could go in that evening with canoes and get back in there and check and see if we could find anything. So we're like, sure, and which, I had to have their permission to do that. They also asked me at that time if I would go ahead and take some trash bags in if we found dead eagles to bring them out, keep them in our freezer until they could get to them. The important part about that is today's technology, I could have recorded that phone call. I would like to have had that recorded because, as I mentioned earlier, there's no way I would have been allowed to have a dead eagle in my possession or in my freezer. So I had to have, permission from Division of Wildlife to do that. So that next day, my wife and I went out, took our canoe, went back into the swamp, and as you can see here, this is the nest. And the limb on top was the bottom limb that broke out of this nest. We went through this entire nest, limb by limb, stick by stick, just tore all the way through it, and we found nothing. Now, that was a good sign. That meant that there was a chance that these eaglets had floated down out of the tree because they were getting pretty good size. They'd been stretching their wings. And this was an ugly day in this swamp. There was water coming up, a lot of poison ivy and other stuff, 3 to 4 foot high. So my wife and I got on the opposite sides of the nest and started doing concentric circles through this stuff. It was so thick. My wife says, hey, I found one. I asked her if it was dead or alive. She said, well, it's alive. So we went around, and sure enough, here was one of the young ones perched up on an old root ball there in the swamp. So we started looking around, and sure enough, we found the second one perched on a small branch, probably 40 feet away. And so it looked like there could have been something wrong with its shoulder. So I kind of got in a little bit closer, and as I did, it jumped into the water and swam over and got up onto the same root ball with its sibling. So they both looked pretty healthy at that point. So we decided, okay, let's back out of here, let the Division of Wildlife know that everything looks okay, but the water was still coming up. These eagles still couldn't fly. We still needed to do something. So got with Division of Wildlife that evening. They asked me if I could escort a couple guys from Woodbury Wildlife area out there the next day because they didn't know where the nest was, and we'd try to build a platform. So I did. So I took my canoe. Ed and Andy from Woodbury brought their canoes out. You can see here the water level's already blocking this road. We gathered up some stuff that they had and some stuff that I had, and we worked our way back into this nest. The first thing we had to do was capture these eaglets and get them protected. And again, it was one of those 95-degree days in July, hot, humid. Interesting thing I like about this picture is here's a baby eagle that still can't fly, but look at the size of it. It's got a wing up over his shoulder, and the other wingtip is clear down by his ankle. So it's amazing how big these birds are. Now, yeah, I also like to tell the story here. I grew up on a Boy Scout camp, so be prepared is the motto, right? So we get out there, and all of a sudden Andy's like, "Oh my gosh, I left my welding gloves back in the back at the truck. I can't handle this eagle." And so I'm like, "Well, would you like a pair of cut-proof Kevlar gloves that I have in my canoe?" So he was very thankful for that. So that really helped out. And then we started building the platform, and wanted to put some sticks, screw some sticks down on the platform. So while Ed was trying to cut these sticks with a machete, I said, "Well, Ed, would you like a saw?" And I got one in my canoe. So anyway, just kind of funny, one of the funny parts of those stories that you'll never forget. So anyhow, you might wonder why we didn't just put the platform up there. So the interesting thing about an eagle, they have what's called a locking talon. So if you think about how hard it is to hold on to a slippery fish with our hands, but you don't see an eagle drop a fish when it catches it out of the river, it's because they're not only are their talons sharp, but when their talons close, it actually locks in place. They have to force their talons open. So the general position that an eagle's talons in are in more of a closed position. So for them to stand on a flat platform is really tough. They either have to walk around on their knuckles or they have to force their talons to be spread out. So we attached some sticks here to the platform so they have something to really wrap their talons around and perch on. Then we put this platform about 15 feet up in a sycamore tree there in the middle of the swamp, got it braced in, took the two eaglets up there that we had caught and put in boxes and had tucked away in the shade in one of the canoes, and got them up there on a platform. And by later that afternoon, the adults were coming back and feeding them at the platform. And within another week or so, they had actually developed the strength to fly, and they lived happily ever after. So it was really one of those good, highlights of my activities there. And this is the nest they rebuilt the next year, just about 50 yards from where the old nest was. And again, this was back in the early 2000s. My cameras weren't as good then, but you could actually see a new eaglet, young eaglet in this nest to our left of the adult eagle. So very, very rewarding. So I'm going to talk about eagle identification tips because it's easy to spot an adult eagle, with that white head and tail. But we're going to talk about comparing those to young eagles, to golden eagles, to some of our other large birds like the turkey and black vultures. So I'm going to ask Dave if he'll put a poll up here again, because the first bird we're going to look at here from an ID part here is this bird here. And if Dave can bring up our little poll here, I want the folks out there to answer whether this is a golden eagle or a bald eagle. Have we got that poll, Dave?
Is it up now?
I'm not seeing it. I'm not sure if others.
It's not letting me relaunch it. It got
up there. There we go.
Okay.
It's up. So if those that are still on will throw in their answer here. Am I looking here at a golden eagle or a bald eagle? Boy, it's running.
It's neck and neck.
Here.
About like Georgia.
Yeah, just about like that political struggle. All right, the bald eagle starting to gain a slight advantage, but it's still close. We're talking 52% say bald, 47%, 48% we're saying golden eagle. All right, looks like most of our results are in, and we've got 46% right now out of 190 responses saying it's a golden eagle, and we've got 53% or 102 responses saying that it's a bald eagle. All right, well that's interesting. I appreciate everybody giving us that poll. So here's one of the things that we do run into sometimes is that a lot of people will see immature bald eagle. By the way, this is an immature bald eagle. This is not a golden eagle. I will show you a couple pictures of golden eagles here later in the program. But it takes 4 to 5 years for an immature eagle to get its full white head and tail. And so there's a lot of color combinations in the meantime. But the one thing that stands out about a golden eagle is whether it's a young one or an adult, it always has the gold colored head feathers. Not brown like this one or not white, but a gold colored head feathers, whether it's a young one or an old one. So I'm going to take a look here at several different color combinations. So here's an adult bald eagle on the left, and here's another immature bald eagle on the right. As you can see, it's got a lot of white mottling in it. Here's one with an adult at the top and another immature at the bottom. This picture, you see the top and the bottom of the picture are two immature bald eagles here. Now, a lot of times you'll see vultures sitting on power lines, and most people from a distance would have just said, oh, that's a couple of vultures sitting on the power lines. Actually, this is real close to the Wills Creek eagle nest. And if you think about being a young eagle with a 6 to 7 foot wingspan trying to learn how to fly, this was a much easier takeoff and landing spot than the middle of a tree with all kinds of limbs and stuff on it. So this was historic. Year after year, that's how these young eagles would learn to fly and land, was to use this big power pole out in the middle of the field. But again, from a distance, might not know what that was. So here's another immature bald eagle. you see it's starting to get a little bit of yellow on the base of the beak, but other colorations there. Here's a young one sitting on a groundhog. Now this one's got more white underneath it than probably any eagle I've seen. In fact, if you didn't see the beak size and the talons on this, you might think it was a slightly off-colored red-tailed hawk because of how much the chest is white. This one has a lot of white on its back feathers. Same with this one here, a lot of mottling on the chest and the wings. And this one's almost blonde. And when you see it flying, they look very interesting. So now we've moved up to one that's probably about 3 years old, and you're really starting to see now the white around the head a little bit. The beak is almost yellow, and you can actually see a few little white tail feathers starting to stick out. But it takes 3 to 4 years to start getting to this point, and almost 4 to 5 before they're solid white head and tail. And this is just a shot of three immatures fighting over dinner out in a field. Now, one of the other birds that sometimes people mistake is the osprey. So we have an osprey here on the right. Now, obviously, no comparison when you look at the color of the beak. The fact that the osprey's chest is solid white, the entire chest and belly coming right down from the neck is solid white, as opposed to, even though the one immature eagle we saw that had some white mottling on the chest, it wasn't that solid white. But the beak is a dead giveaway. But you can see how the osprey does have that kind of black stripe back through the head area. Sometimes, as an eagle's getting into that 3-year-old range, it kind of has that black stripe kind of through that whitish head. So we kind of call that the osprey phase, but there's still no real comparison to looking at that little sharp hooked black beak compared to the yellow beak even that this one has. So another bird that oftentimes, especially in flight, we might mistake for eagles are our vultures. So we got a couple shots here. So this is our turkey vulture with the red head, and this is the black vulture, which has the darker black head. This vulture is becoming more common in Ohio. It's a lot more aggressive vulture than our turkey vulture, so farmers don't like them. They actually will kill young livestock and stuff right after it's born. So the black vultures, not well liked at all in Ohio. From a wing spread standpoint, here's our turkey vulture in a full wing spread, and here's the black vulture in a wing spread. And so one of the interesting differences here, you see the white in the primary feathers at the tip of the wings on the black vulture, and this becomes a good identifying characteristics when they're flying. So thinking about flying, we often see big birds flying in the air. So how can we quickly tell whether it's a bald eagle or if it's just a big vulture? So the bald eagle flies with its wings flat out like a plank. So they're always flat out when they're soaring, as opposed to vultures, especially the turkey vultures, their wingtips are always tipped up. So, and they tend to, they have a kind of a jittering soaring flight. They're always correcting, whereas the bald eagles is very smooth. So here's some other examples: flat out like a plank, always flying in a V shape. Again, this one flat out. Now, one of the things here, let's say if this were a black vulture. Now the black vulture flies. I don't have a good flying picture of a black vulture, but the black vulture flies with its wings more flat than a turkey vulture, but their wings are tipped forward. So they would be tipped up forward towards the head. And when they're actually flying, and here's another immature bald eagle, what it looks like from underneath. When an eagle or a turkey vulture is flapping its wings, it's a very slow flap. So just think about a very slow, smooth flap for either one of them. The black vulture, on the other hand, has 3 or 4 real quick wing flaps and a glide similar to a red-tailed hawk. So again, very easy to identify. Even if you have black vultures and turkey vultures flying together in a group, the black vultures they'll look a little bit smaller, a shorter tail, the white wing tips like we saw in the other picture, and if they flap real quick. Again, here's another turkey vulture, always has those wings tipped up. And then I got one shot here of an osprey flying, and again, it doesn't look at all like a bald eagle. It's so white underneath, got the white spreading out towards the black wrist patches on the wings, and also their wings are never flat out, straight out. They're always bent there at the wrist. I did say I would share you a couple golden eagle pictures, so apologize that these are the only pictures I've got of this. Mine on the left that was not taken here in Ohio. This comes from a shot I took out while hiking in Montana. I have seen a few golden eagles here in Ohio, usually over around the wilds. Almost every winter, there's a couple that overwinter in that area of the reclaimed strip mine lands out around the wilds. But they're also starting to see a lot more of them in southern Ohio. People I know in Vinton County have gotten shots of golden eagles that are migrating through here during the winter on their field cameras and stuff. But as you can see on both of these, they have that gold colored head feathering. And they're all also always a solid brown. You don't really get that white mottling and stuff like we do. Now, an immature golden eagle does have a white, very bright white patch on the top of its tail, near its rump, on the immature. So you do sometimes see that in flight. But I hope to see more golden eagles here in Ohio sometime soon. But they don't stay here year round. They do migrate through. Most of us think of the golden eagles as being out west. There is a population. It's up in the east coast of Canada, around Newfoundland, up in those areas. So they migrate through this area. So at that point, we've got this picture here. No, this eagle was not screaming. This eagle was actually yawning, which is my cue that we've probably bored everybody to death by now. So it's time to close off my part of the program here, other than the questions. So thank everybody for coming today. I've got my contact information up here, and Laura's got contact information up here. Feel free to, send me an email, give me a phone call if you've got questions about the presentation or about eagles in general. And I know Laura can answer an awful lot of questions too. So Dave, what kind of questions have we been getting?
We've got lots of questions. Can you see the question answer section? It might be easier for you to just walk through those. You've answered a lot of them, I think, since they popped in. And then okay. Jess has been monitoring the chat. So whatever's not in the Q&A session, okay. Then she'll wrap up and pull in questions that haven't been already touched on. So
the first one here that I see that I didn't touch on, Alana Hoffman asked, will eagles use an old or abandoned nest? Yeah, actually, we've seen examples where a pair of eagles has built 2 or 3 nests in an area and have rotated to them in different years. And most eagles nests, most of them don't start from scratch. A lot of them they take over maybe the largest nest in a heron rookery, or they take over a red-tailed hawk nest, and then they just build and add on to it. What we will see is if a nest has actually collapsed and totally blown out of a tree in a storm or whatever, that they often will build their own nest from scratch in that area. They often will use an abandoned hawk's nest or another abandoned eagle nest. Yes. Christy Welch asked, why do they usually build in sycamore trees? So my answer to that would be more than likely just because of, a couple things. One is sycamore trees grow mostly along your water areas. So your rivers have a lot of sycamore trees. They're also usually the largest trees in the area, and the eagles like to have a super canopy tree where they're on top. But they also have an open branching structure. So if you think about flying in and out of a tree with a 7-foot wingspan, if you don't have to bump into every little branch, like trying to go in and out of an oak tree or something. So I think those are probably the main reasons why the sycamore trees are most commonly used.
Hey, Brad, what edition of the Woodland Journal is that article in? Do you have any idea? Because I could post that. If you don't have it in your mind, I'll just post it with our results.
It was in one of the late 2016 or 2017 ones, so we can pull that up and post it. But I did write an article
we'll post
about
the link.
that. Yeah, we'll find the link to that.
Thanks.
So it says, when do they start building? This was George Weegley asked, when do they start building or adding to their nests? So normally it's in the late fall, early winter. As daylight shortens and it triggers their response, their natural responses to start building nests, they will do that. Then as you get into December and the daylight time actually gets too short, it actually turns that trigger off, and they basically just hang out in their area and they feed, maybe mingle with other eagles and stuff. And then usually mid to late January, as the daylight again starts to pick up and get a little bit longer, it'll actually trigger that nest building activity again. And so they'll go back in, start adding to nests, and then continue on through the breeding process. Teresa Stotts asked, how many years do females produce young their entire life? I can't say that I have an exact answer for that one, Laura. I don't know if you, I mean, we've got examples of some that have produced for a long time, for probably at least 15 years.
Yeah, I think pretty much until, once they reach maturity at age 5, and as long as they have a mate, they'll produce every year.
Thank you. Jan Douglas asked, what is the square mile area of their territory? Another good question. As Laura pointed out, you get up around Lake Erie and some of those places where there's tremendous population of eagles and not a whole lot of woodlots, some of their territories are pretty small. I'm going to say in central Ohio, it seems like most of the nests, not all of them, but most of the nests seem to have at least a half mile of separation. Some of them have several miles of separation. So, but most of the time, especially during the actual nesting and feeding areas, and this may help answer the next question, which was how far adults range from their nest to find food. Normally, what I've seen while monitoring these nests is they normally stay within about a mile of the nest when they're hunting for food during the actual nesting season. And once you get outside of that and they start teaching the young ones how to catch their food, and again by August, we'll say they're out of the nest, they realize they don't have to go back to the nest to eat their food once they catch it. You won't see them at the nest, and they might disperse within 2, 3, 4 miles. And I've seen adults during the winter time maybe up to 5 miles from their actual nesting territory. Patricia Capel asked, what power spotting scope do you suggest? So I've used different ones, but I prefer a 20 to 60 power variable. I used to have a 20 to 50. The thing that I find more important is the actual diameter of the objective lens, or the front lens of the spotting scope. The bigger it is, the better light transmission you're going to get in. So usually I use a 20 to 60 power variable. I think the one I currently have has a 70 millimeter objective lens. So, and you can get some of them relatively cheaply, or you can spend $3,000 on a real nice Swarovski. Susan Richardson asked, why was the eagle population in Ohio so low 40 years ago? So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the use of DDT in our farming infrastructure up through the early to mid 1900s, as well as the destroying of all of our habitat, wooded habitat along our rivers for farming, and the hunting pressures and everything else is what really caused the population to dip to that really, really low point back in the 70s. Oh, here's a good one from Rick Ford. How does nesting eels impact timber operations, and are there any regulations like no harvesting, etc.? So that's a good question, Rick. When I first started giving these presentations, I spent more time back in the early 2000s showing charts of the recommended areas that the Division of Wildlife would talk about, how close you could get to a nest and what kind of activities you could actually do within those areas. And so it was recommended, that you didn't do any harvesting within at least 100 yards of the nest at any time of the year. They didn't want, during the nesting time of the year, any activity taking place within 400 yards of a nest. As it is now, and I think Laura pointed out how the eagles are up on Lake Erie where they're close together, they tolerate themselves. We've also found that eagles are far more tolerant to human activity than what we thought they were. Interesting thing here, if you're a farmer and you run your tractors and stuff in really close to the trees and stuff, the tractor, the truck, those kind of things, eagles don't seem to see those as a predator. But if you get off the tractor and start walking across the field, they see you as a predator and they'll immediately fly, or they'll immediately start screaming. So that we don't see as much issue with the human impact on that now. Now, as far as actual timber operations, there are still recommendations there. And as far as in Ohio, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service handles any issues with having a timber harvest around an eagle nest. So my recommendation there is, if you know that somebody's going to do that, is have them get with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, take a look at it. I'm sure they're going to say, stay a certain distance away from that, probably, again, within 100 yards of the nest. They're also going to ask you probably to do that harvest in December, if at all possible. From late, you could do it in October, November when they're not using the nest, but probably between October and December is when they're going to ask you to do that harvest, because the eagles aren't using the nest at that point.
Yeah, Brad,
We've had that come up a couple times.
just to add to that, Brad, there's a website link that might be useful, that kind of outlines some of those parameters, and sometimes they ask that you get a permit just in case you cause any damage or disturb the nest. That kind of protects the operation. So I'll look that up and add that into the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. There was a comment here from Melanie Harris saying there's at least one eagle in Trumbull County that's banded. I haven't seen a pic that shows the numbers good enough, but if you're able to get the band numbers, or less to look up that number. Laura, I don't know, can your biologist look up that number?
Yeah, probably. You could also, so the banding, the number, or you have the number?
They're saying if they were able to get a good enough look at it.
Oh yeah, you could just report that to the banding lab yourself, actually. Yeah, so the bird banding lab, the USGS bird banding lab, that's operated by the federal government. They have a web page, and you can go to that and report a band number directly there. There's a good chance it's not necessarily from Ohio. It could be from anywhere. So they would have the most complete set of records. So I would report it directly to the bird banding lab if you were able to figure it out.
Okay. Next question from Mary Hauser: is the nest monitoring program still active and looking for volunteers? Actually, no. So the volunteer nest monitoring program, because the recovery has been so successful, and it was becoming quite a chore for someone to keep up with all the data that was coming in from all the volunteer groups, from all the nests in the state. It was almost impossible to keep up with all those individual detailed reports. So there really isn't a volunteer nest monitoring program anymore. There are still folks like myself. There's a few, several around the state that still monitor these nests in case there is an issue or a problem, or just because of our level of interest in it and being able to help educate others about the recovery of the bald eagles. Laura, it looks like there's a question here for you. Teresa Stotts asks, how are the 10 square mile areas selected? So I assume that's for the aerial monitoring.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure what went into those originally. Those were selected way before I started with the agency. But I believe they were selected in different, they are scattered throughout the state. So again, trying to represent those different watersheds. So we have a few that are up in the Lake Erie watershed, a couple over in Northeast Ohio, a couple in Southern Ohio. So they're spread out across the state to kind of get a sample of what's going on in different sections of the state. But that's about all I can say about that.
And Laura, in looking at those blocks myself, it looks like they were originally selected because they were areas that had eagle nest activity in them,
I think
multiple nest activities.
Yeah, I think they at least had one, nest originally, like the ones in Southern Ohio, like most of those typically have one nest in them. But it was just as much to get I'd say more to get an idea of the productivity. So, they wanted to make sure they had at least one nest in that area, and that they could then check that for the number of eaglets, just to see if there was any differences in productivity around the state. And but yeah, at least one nest, but definitely there were some selected in those areas of higher densities just to see what was happening in those areas as well.
Yeah. Here's a question from Gene Peremsky asking, why are the Ohio River counties short of eagles? My only answer to that is it's just taken a long time for enough eagles to slowly work their way down from Lake Erie, or coming up from some of the places in Tennessee below that have started, their eagle populations rebounding to get to the Ohio River. So I think that's probably the easiest answer, but I also don't know if there's any other issues with the Ohio River as far as the cleanliness of the water, fish supply, those kind of things. But I think it probably has just more to do with it just takes a while for them to migrate that far south and start nesting. You see anything different on that, Laura?
Yeah, I think that's a good hypothesis. Yeah, again, like you said, back in the late 70s, the eagles, that was for the whole Great Lakes ecosystem of those 4 nests up in Ottawa County. And certainly, I believe that has been kind of an epicenter of activity and the population that has slowly migrated out. So yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, Pam Dollard asks, I've been watching a nest in Hamilton County. I've seen 2 adult eagles in a tree nearby. Would they still be in the process of building the nest? Absolutely, they could be. And if you're seeing 2 adult eagles in a tree nearby, that's probably a pair. One of the things to keep in mind, if you see an individual adult eagle someplace, I wouldn't assume that there's a nest there necessarily, because there's single individual eagles out there, just like there's single adult people out there that haven't made it up yet. So, but if you're seeing a pair together like that, it's probably a male and female pair, and if they're near that nest area, they've probably been working on it and probably will pick up that again here in January. Harriet Dana asks, our winters are getting warmer due to climate change. We've also seen a pattern of wet springs and hot, dry summers. Has this had any impact on the eagle population? The positive impact that I've actually seen on this, I think, with the winters getting warmer is our rivers stay open more. So the fish, the available fish for them to eat is probably better. They're not having to eat quite as much roadkill, maybe. In the past, when we've had some really, really severe cold winters, where I would see them really congregating was along those parts of the rivers, maybe below a dam, like below Wills Creek Dam, where the water would always stay open for a half mile to a mile below the dam, or on the rivers below some of the power plants where warm water was going back into, say, the Muskingum River from the Conesville power plant or a place like that, where the water was kept open. So, it may have a positive effect on eagle populations. I don't know of any negative impacts yet at this point. George Weegley, well, thank you for this one. She said, Brad, your photography is stunning. What size telephoto lenses do you use? So actually, I use simple, what I'll call super zoom point and shoot cameras. Okay, so these aren't the big, huge telephoto lenses that you see guys with that are doing professional photography. These are handheld, what's called a super zoom camera. So the lens moves in and out as you zoom it in and out. Now, some of these are pretty high power. I'm currently using a Nikon P900 that actually has about an 83 power optical zoom on it. So, I mean, you can get in really close, but a lot of these pictures were taken with a couple of the cameras previous to that one, which were either 42 or 63 power optical zooms. You can get them from Nikon, from Canon, from others. And these cameras are in the range from $250 to $500 or $600. So they're not the several $1,000s that you'll pay to get a really good professional camera and a big high quality lens. Now, one of these days, I'm going to buy a real camera. I keep telling myself that. But if you like my pictures here, I appreciate that. But also just to point out that you don't have to have the super expensive equipment to get good pictures. If you're prepared, I always have a camera in the truck, spotting scope camera in the truck. So, okay, next question from Dorothy Martin asked, where do you go to get a spotting scope? Cabela's is a good place to start. If you've got a Cabela's anywhere near you, they sell several different models of spotting scopes. But you can go online. If you're ever up in the Holmes County area, around the Amish country, there's a place there called Time and Optics. And they have a wide variety of binoculars and spotting scopes. But you can get them through some of the camera manufacturers that make them. But you could also you could go online and get them there. But I like going to Time and Optics or Cabela's. Joel and Kiko asked, do eagles ever use cell towers to make their nests, or are those always ospreys? I haven't seen any eagle nests on cell phone towers myself. I've seen a lot of osprey nests on cell phone towers. I haven't seen any eagle nests on cell phone towers yet. Laura, do you have any?
Yeah, actually, yes, they will sometimes use cell towers to make nests. So sometimes they'll take over an osprey nest that's on a cell tower. So we're seeing more and more eagles using the cell towers. Unfortunately, it becomes a little bit of an issue because they can cause interference to cell tower transmission. So sometimes they will seek permit, the cell companies will seek permits to remove those nests after the nesting season.
All right, got one from Marnie Tichnell here. Can you explain further the changes to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that may impact bald eagles? And Laura, I know you were talking a little bit about that the other day, so I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah, well, actually, because the bald eagles are protected under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, that is separate from the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So actually the changes to the MBTA won't really impact eagles, but they do have more of an impact for other birds. Basically, what has currently happened is this idea of incidental take or accidental take. So if you accidentally do harm to a bird, you can't be punished for it, or there's no legal protection. But if you're so this is an example where this is a problem, is if like a situation like an oil spill where a lot of birds, and oil spills are certainly not intentional, but a lot of birds can be killed as a result of the oil spill. And so that's basically saying that oil spills are the oil companies can't be held responsible for any accidental deaths. So that's kind of the situation where that's an issue. So it'll be interesting to see if that rule holds up with the change in administration and if it holds up in federal courts, because there was some controversy about that in the last couple of years as they were trying to push this rule through. So stay tuned on that one for sure.
Thanks, Laura. Julie Gee asks, why is lead shot still being used? So lead shot itself, when we think of what I'll call shot, is for duck hunting and goose hunting, that kind of stuff, and it is not being used anymore for those purposes. But lead slugs are still being used in shotguns for deer hunting. So that's where the issue comes into play with the lead poisoning, is if somebody has used a lead slug and when they're deer hunting, shot a deer but didn't recover it, eagles find it. The best, easiest place to start eating is where that bullet went in, because that's a hole through the leather already. So that's where they'll start tearing into it. And if they get some of those lead fragments in their crop, it can stay in there for an extended period of time and start getting the blood into the bloodstream, or the lead into the bloodstream. So that's the problem there. So at some point, if we can get the hunting folks to quit using lead slugs, that would help. Dorothy Martin asks, how does an eagle in an area affect area hawks in their nesting? So my experience with that is I have seen eagles and hawks nest relatively close together, but it's a tenuous relationship. I've seen hawks especially red-tailed hawks, try to chase eagles out of the area. I've seen eagles harass the hawks if they get too close, but normally it's the smaller bird trying to get the eagles out of the area, but it doesn't work. The eagles are too big. So I've seen cases like with the Wills Creek nest where maybe 200 yards from the eagle nest would be a red-tailed hawk nest, and they would coexist. So Gene Perensky asked, what is the breeding age? So the youngest that I know of is 3. We've seen some that have bred at 3 years of age. I don't think they can breed before that. Most of the time it's 4 or 5 years of age, but we have seen some pairs where we knew the age of the adults that were breeding at the age of 3. So, I know the pair at Wills Creek, when they started, the male was only 3 years old there and the female was 6 years old. Or I don't know if you know any younger than 3.
Oh,
I wouldn't think. So, Kathy Bowers asks, I've heard that a potential restriction to the increase in the eagle population, the lack of large trees, is there any validity to that concern? Well, yeah, I think there is, because I think if we don't have, trees large enough to hold the size of these bald eagle nests. I mean, these nests are big, and they get bigger every year. And every year we have some that collapse because some of the branches holding them. Some of the worst things I've seen are eagles building in cottonwood trees. Cottonwood trees are very brittle. And so you build a big nest in the top of a brittle cottonwood tree. It's not long before it collapses. So with my forestry hat on, we encourage people to leave what we call riparian zones along all rivers and streams that we can. And if we leave those protective, woodlands around rivers and streams, then we have the opportunity then to have large trees grow there for eagles to nest in. But if we destroy those riparian habitat areas, that could have an effect. They do need a tree big enough to hold their nests. Do birds interbreed sometimes? For instance, ospreys and bald eagle. Not that I know of in this case. Laura, you got any?
yeah. Well, it depends on how genetically close two species are. So eagles and osprey are actually relatively distant, so it would not be realistic they're too far apart to interbreed. But there certainly are other bird species that are very closely related genetically that are able to interbreed and produce hybrids and successful hybrids. So an example is there's a species called the golden-winged warbler, which unfortunately is declining, but it does interbreed with a similar warbler called the blue-winged warbler, and hybridize and successfully reproduce after that. And it's actually a problem for the golden-winged warbler in terms of that's contributing to its decline. So not ospreys and eagles, and not any other, I haven't heard of any other bald eagle hybrids in North America.
I've never heard of that either, Laura. So thank you for that. Nancy Walker asked, at what age does the beak begin to show yellowing? So I've seen yellowing at the base of the beak actually starting in probably this, the end of the first, early second year. It starts just right back around what I call the mouth area there. It starts to show a little bit of yellowing. But again, it takes it out to almost at 4 to 5 years to get that solid yellow beak, just like it takes that long to get their full white head and tail. Pat Edwards asked, are there any webcams in Ohio to view eagles in their nests? So we know there are webcams around several other places. I'm currently working with a professor over at Capital University that owns a property called the Primer property down by Logan, Ohio, on the Hocking River down there. And in the process of looking at possibly setting up an eagle cam on the nest that's down there. So I'm probably going to be meeting with them here this month, looking at that. We've got some volunteers from a power company that has climbers that do their tree work, that have volunteered their time to actually climb and put the cameras and stuff into the nest. We've already been in touch with the Fish and Wildlife Service and folks that have experience with putting in eagle cams. So, I'm not sure if there's any others in Ohio right now. Laura, you do know of?
Yes, there are. We used to have some up on our website, but there are some up in northern Ohio. I think a couple of them are in the Cleveland area. One's at Avon Lake, and there's another one east of Cleveland. There are a couple. Again, they used to be on our website, but we have completely redone our website. I'm not sure if they are currently up or not, but I'm going to take a look, and if I can, I'll post that in the chat.
I just found one and put it in there.
Okay, great.
It says East Lake, Ohio.
Yeah.
Eagle cam.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Ralph Bin asks, do they take over crane nests? So this is going to be a kind of a two-part thing. First off, by cranes, you're probably thinking blue herons. So yes, they will take over blue heron nests. Oftentimes they'll take over either the largest one or the tallest one in the heron rookery and build it bigger and start from that. And so I've seen two different cases here. I've seen where they've built a big nest in a heron rookery and chased the herons out. I've also seen where they started to take over a nest in a heron rookery and the herons chased the eagles out. But cranes themselves, the cranes we have here in Ohio, we do have sandhill cranes. They're a more of a ground nesting bird in the marshes and swamps and stuff versus a tree nesting bird. So, but yeah, blue herons, they will take over blue heron nests. John Maddox asked, do wind farms have negative effects on eagle populations? Laura, you can weigh in on this one, and I think they probably will, but I don't have any specific data.
Yeah, so yes, wind farms, occasionally eagles will collide with wind turbines. We've had very few cases of that here in Ohio. At the moment here in Ohio, I think other concerns that you mentioned in your presentation, like the lead poisoning issue, the collisions with power lines or on the road, those are probably bigger concerns right now. But that is something that, you know, as we move forward, more and more wind farms, it could be more of a concern here in the state.
Thanks, Laura. Mark Zune asks, is the low Ohio River nesting numbers have any correlation to the river's pollution? You know, it could have. Again, I'm not well enough versed in the Ohio River, but as you say, there's a lot of industry along the Ohio River. I don't know what the fishing is like in the Ohio River, so it could have. And I guess what we'll probably see is whether once we have all those counties down there actually have nests, if they continue to expand, if there's enough fish and enough quality, you know, food source for them, they'll probably expand. But if the pollution is the point where it hurts that, you know, then maybe so. But I don't have a direct answer, you know, because I know it's taken a long time for the eagles to get down there from Lake Erie to start with. Stephen Shoemaker, is our otter population a competitive concern? Less fish in our creeks? I suppose. Fortunately, even though fish is the eagle's main diet, they're adaptive. So if the river otters start eating too much of the fish, they'll move on to squirrels and rabbits. And you know, I will mention that, you know, all those stories of you know, watch your young kids in the yard of bald eagle taking them away. Well, that's not going to happen. But the biologists have been in nests looking through and have found a lot of fish collars and some, or, you know, not fish collars, excuse me, cat collars. So, you know, if you're one of those people that raise chickens and you let them out in the yard once in a while out of their pens, if you're close to an eagle nest, I'd watch out for that. So you know, I don't know if the otter population will be a big competitive concern. Here's a good one from Guy Wagner. Do eagles compete with osprey with territories? I think that's probably a yes. But at the same time, I have experience with nests in Central Ohio where there are eagles nests and osprey nests within very close proximity, within just a few hundred yards. I think it probably, in my estimation, is it probably has more to do with the available food source. You know, they both eat fish. I mean, ospreys are almost 100% fish. So if there's enough food source, I don't think it would be a competitive problem. You got anything else on that, Laura?
Yeah, I think there can be some tension between the two species. Again, I think it just depends on, I think, yeah, the food source could have a lot to do with their comfort in being close to each other.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I see the most with those two interacting is where, you know, an osprey has caught a fish and then the eagle chases it and tries to get the fish away from it. And that does take place because the eagle's a bigger bird, more powerful flyer. They're an opportunist. So if they're in the same area and they see a osprey flying with a fish, Get your camera ready. You might get to see or your binoculars ready, a real good interaction there where the eagle tries to chase the osprey and get the fish. Timothy White answers, is there a way to know if a nest I observe has already been reported? Laura, that's for you.
Yeah, I would say it's going to be tough for us to keep up with all of the reports that we get. It was really tough last year, and that was a primary focus of our time in the spring. It's okay to report something that's already been reported. Don't worry about that. We appreciate any and all reports, and also it's good even if it's been reported before. If you report it again, it lets us know that that nest is still active and producing. So don't worry if it's already been reported.
And if you're anywhere in that east central Ohio area, so let's say Coshocton, Muskingum, Tuscarawas, Holmes, Licking, Knox, any of those counties in there, I think I reported over 70 active nests last year in that area. So if you just give me a call or shoot me an email, I can let you know whether it's been reported or not. Teresa Dozer asks, since the bald eagles come back, have you noticed a change in their behaviors, their sizes compared to before the decline? Of course, I wasn't around before the decline, I guess. So I don't know what their size and stuff were, but I can't say that I've heard or seen anything like that. The only thing I can say from the behavior standpoint is that I think we're seeing eagles, as Laura pointed out earlier, much more tolerant of each other from their nesting habitats and stuff than what we thought they would be as the population gets bigger. But have you seen anything with research that, Laura, that shows any differences?
Yeah, I agree with you in that the tolerance is, I'd say, the big thing. Tolerance to humans, but also tolerance to one another, like just, again, seeing nests built in much closer frequency or closer density than was previously thought. One of the Fish and Wildlife Service raptor biologists has said he's seen down in places like Louisiana multiple nests built in the same tree, actually. So that's really fascinating. So
Yeah.
To see if we see that kind of behavior here in Ohio at some point. But in terms of size, I'm not sure if there have been any studies done on that. But size does vary by the range anyway. The further north you go, the larger the birds are in general, and that's just in response to environmental differences with temperatures.
Yeah, to your point there, your Alaska eagles are going to be a lot bigger than your Florida eagles.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, Brian Hackett, what % of their diet is made up of fish, fresh kills versus scavenging and carrion? I personally, what I've seen, I think this varies by season. I think in the summer, the spring and summer, the nesting time of year, I think there's a lot more fish and fresh kills versus wintertime when there's not as much availability to the fish, but there's a lot of roadkill and especially the deer kill and stuff in Ohio. I see a lot more eating on carrion and stuff in the wintertime than I do in the rest of the year. So, but percentage wise, I can't give you a good number on that, but I think it's a real high percentage of fish and fresh during the nesting season. I haven't seen one trying to drag a dead eagle up to a nest anyway, or a dead deer up to a nest. They always seem to be bringing in a freshly killed fish or rodent of some kind. Thomas Jersey asks, any tips and warnings on finding a nest? So tips, this is the best time of year to find nests. If you can drive any of the roads around any of your waterways. I used to think that was only going to happen around the large rivers or the large lakes, but we're seeing them building around some of our smaller streams. So, some of the even smaller streams, if you drive around any of the roads there and just, looking into the canopy, you won't miss an eagle nest. You might see a hawk's nest. If a hawk's nest looks, maybe the size of let's say an old wash tub kind of thing, something like that, and it looks big, okay? But when you're looking at an eagle nest, you're looking like the size of a truck bed. So I mean, it's a big difference. But this is the best time of year to look for that. Again, here in the next month or so, you'll start seeing a lot more activity around those nests. So it'd be a lot easier to tell whether it's an eagle nest or a hawk's nest or whatever. As far as warnings, I would say try not to get too close. If you can make that identification, and I can tell you, when I first found the Wills Creek nest back in 1996, from a mile away, I saw a spot in a tree, a dark spot in a tree that I hadn't seen the week previous. So I thought, okay, that's something that's got to be checked out. So I got with the landowner, because it was on private property instead of a dead end road. I knew the landowner, asked him if I could hike back in and check it out. At that time, all I had was a small power pair of binoculars. So my girlfriend and I, we hiked back in, we could see this nest, but we couldn't, since it was in a sycamore tree and the upper branches are white, we couldn't tell if what we were seeing was a white head or if we were just seeing the branch, behind it, as the white branch. So we kept getting closer and closer and closer. And finally, the eagle turns its head sideways and you saw that great big yellow bill in the binoculars. And it's like, crap, this is an eagle nest, but we're too close. I mean, but at that point, we were probably only 150 yards from the nest. And during the nesting season, that's too close. So we immediately got out of there. And the reason that's too close is if they have eggs and they have to keep those eggs warm, and if we spook those eagles and they get up off the nest and leave for any length of time, the eggs could freeze and you've killed the eaglets. So that's really the problem with getting too close to eagle nests during the nesting season. So between late February and April, at least, you really should stay as far away as you can possibly can and still observe. May, June, and July, you can get a lot closer. The eagles aren't going to be damaged at that point. They're big enough to take care of themselves pretty much. But those would be my warnings. Just, in that early part, stay as far away from them as you can.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I'd add is private property, respect private property, or, at the very least, if you feel like you suspect it, talk with the landowner first before approaching any nests.
Yeah. Thomas Jervy asked, should we report eagles we observe that have a band? I don't know if you need to necessarily report the eagle if it has a band. Obviously, if you would find a dead eagle that has a band, you would want to contact Division of Wildlife immediately and don't handle the eagle or anything. You may be able to get a band number off of it or something. And there is an interesting, they don't do as many eagle bandings as they used to. They do very few now. When they were doing it back in the 90s, you have a silver band and a red band. One is the state band, one is the federal band. And they always put them on a specific ankle. But when we started getting nests inland in Ohio, the inland nests, they reversed the sequence of which ankle those bands were on so that they could tell whether, when they found another nest, whether the eagles in that nest were hatched off of Lake Erie or if they were hatched from an inland nest. So there were some differences in how they did the banding patterns back then, but they do so little now. I don't see very many eagles anymore with leg bands. Occasionally I do, not very often.
Brad, I scheduled this webinar for 2 hours. I think it will continue, but if it goes off, I can't change. I'm looking at changing it and extending it. I think we'll be fine, but I just want to give people that warning that if it goes away, we apologize, but otherwise go keep rolling with the questions. This is fascinating.
I'm fine with answering questions if people are still throwing them out there. So Renee Clark asked what citizen science platforms are best to report nest, local, and individual sightings. Laura, that's yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to post in the chat our reporting webs. Oops, that's the wrong one. Hold on. Yeah, I'm going to post in the chat our Division of Wildlife reporting website. And so that's really the best one to report any eagle nests.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll come here in a minute. I just need to click around on my computer.
Okay, while she's doing that, Tim and Phyllis Mackey asked, will there be presentations on drone monitoring in the future? So my concern with drone monitoring of bald eagle nests is, bald eagles are territorial. A drone is about the size of a bald eagle. So my fear there would be, if people start trying to fly drones over bald eagle nests to monitor and stuff, you could actually end up with eagles attacking the drones, and not always sure who wins on these. If it's done properly, somebody's going to lose a several $1,000 drone. If it's not done right, it could injure the eagles. But so I don't think you're going to see people getting a lot of permission to use drones to monitor bald eagle nests.
No, both the Division of Wildlife and Fish and Wildlife Service do not want people monitoring nests with drones.
Yeah. Rosemary Kovacs asks, is Ohio unique in the number of eagles, or do other states have more? So I don't have exact numbers for you, but I know that Ohio is, because of the population in this part of the country, starting from the 4 nests there on Lake Erie, Ohio is very fortunate to have a really high number of bald eagles and bald eagle nests, probably more than any of the other immediately surrounding states. Now, obviously, if you go, Alaska is polluted with bald eagles. Minnesota has a lot of bald eagles. Some of the other states out west have a lot, but and Florida has a lot. But to my knowledge, Ohio, at least in the Midwest part of the country, is probably the highest number. Or you got any other information on that?
I don't have any numbers. Some states don't count their eagles, but I do know, generally speaking, there's a general increase in eagles across the country. So I'm sure other states are seeing an increase, but I don't know for sure what those numbers are.
Okay. Stephanie Barkey, being that we have such a small gene pool, are there going to be genetic problems? What do you think on that one, Laura?
I think that we don't know for sure how much. I mean, there was some additions to the population from outside those original 4 nests here in the state. That certainly would be interesting to collect. It would be an interesting project to see what our genetic diversity is like. I would say so far, given the huge increase that we've seen in our population, that any kind of genetic bottleneck issues certainly have not been a problem. So I think we're probably okay given the huge increases that we've seen in recent years.
And Laura, on top of that, I don't think we're seeing any of the physical deformities that you might see in the beak or talons or whatever if the genetic pool was too small. I don't think we're seeing those. So, Ann Douglas asks, acreage-wise, how large of a water body or area do eagles need to feed? She has a 2.5 acre lake, about a half mile from an active nest. So we're seeing, a 2.5 acre lake is big enough if there's fish in it. In fact, I've had issues where smaller lakes than that people have been maybe raising fish in for sale that have had eagle nests in the area come in. And so we've had some negative interactions on that. One of the nests in Coshocton County was built right over the ponds for the Fender's Fish Hatchery. And these are small ponds, but yes, they obviously have a lot of fish in them. But again, we're starting to see eagles nesting and feeding out of some fairly small streams. So, if there's a food source there, they're going to find it and they're going to use it. John Kohler asks, can lead found in fishing lures and weights also have an impact on lead poisoning in eagles? I would say that would be a yes if those fishing lures and weights, are swallowed by fish and then the eagle gets it that way. I don't think those, that left on the bottom of the lake are going to have any problem, but it's more them actually ingesting the lead itself. So I think it would have to take, those either still being attached to a fish or in the fish's body for them to get that. Melissa Muth, I've puzzled over 2 nests in close proximity at McGee Marsh, 2 nesting pairs. Is it normal to be so close, and does it imply relatedness? I know exactly which 2 nests you're talking about, and Laura probably does too. And yeah, they're both right there in the parking lot, right? So it's pretty interesting. If you've probably been up there, Melissa, for the Greatest Birding Week in America festival, and hundreds, if not thousands of cars parked all around the area there, and it doesn't seem to bother them. And this goes back to, we're finding them to be a lot more tolerant. I don't know how much it would have to do with relatedness, because we do see that the young eagles, they'll migrate. I mean, they'll migrate up to, at least we know 100 miles, because the ones that ended up down in Coshocton came right off of Lake Erie. So it's, maybe young ones came back to that area and built their own nest, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. I don't believe. Melanie's asking you, Laura, if that applies to wind turbines also. I'm not sure which question is. Was that question maybe relating back to the cell phone towers?
Yeah,
I don't
I'm not sure how to answer. So maybe if Melanie can follow up what she means, we'll try to get to that a little bit.
Laura, I think that was probably related to the wind farms. Wasn't there a question about that?
Oh, yeah, well, sure, certainly. A standalone wind turbine has the potential, the bird could potentially collide with that. It doesn't matter if it's part of a big wind farm and there's multiple turbines, or just a standalone, that could still happen.
Thomas Derby asks, is there a viable alternative to lead in deer management? And I think followed up by George Wigley asking, are copper sabots safer to eagles than lead slugs? So the copper is probably safer than the lead. So that might be the viable alternative. I'm not a deer hunter myself, so I don't know enough about that, but I would say that we need to go to something other than lead to help get away from the lead poisoning that we're seeing in the eagle population. And it earlier in the presentation there, the one eagle rescue attempt, the first one that did have high levels of lead in it and died. Exactly a week prior to that, the same Division of Wildlife employee had rescued a sick eagle over around Dillon Lake in Muskingum County and had the exact same issue. It also died of lead poisoning. I think it had 0.14 parts per million, or whatever the relative number is. And the one that I was involved with had 0.24, and 0.08 was the legal or the lethal limit. So both of those eagles had 2 to 3 times the lethal limit of lead in them, and we're pretty sure they came off of deer slugs.
I'm gonna link to a page on the Peregrine Fund's website that talks about the North American Non-Lead Partnership. So it can give you a little more information about hunting without lead.
Okay, Barry Gerard. Hey, Barry. You asked there a couple weeks ago. We were working along Alum Creek in Westerville, looked up and saw 4 adult eagles at once. Could they be just passing through or nesting in the area? We've been watching and have only seen 1 pair once a few days later. Again, with being in the Westerville area there along Alum Creek, there are nests in that general area, and because of the fact that, and especially this time of year, I see adult eagles up to 5 miles away from their nest areas, territories. They may have just been from 2 different nests, or they could be a couple of there could be a couple there that aren't pairs, that are just adults that are looking for pairs that were in that area. But hey, as you know, Barry, it's always good to see 3 or 4 of them at once. So thanks for that question. Kathleen Bradley, what about PFAS and fish in the Ohio River? I don't know the technical answer to the PFAS question, Laura. Do you think that's an issue?
It's possible, but again, I'm not real sure.
I don't know if we know what the chemical effect is on the eagles' eggs and stuff on that, like it was with DDT.
Yeah.
So sorry, we can't give you a better answer to that question. Teresa Dozer, are there designated areas where trees are grown specifically for supporting bald eagle nests and along waterways for them to feed? I don't know of any designated areas. Like I said earlier, we encourage that trees be left along all your waterways for various reasons. One is the filtering of runoff from other areas into those streams. Those wooded areas help filter that. The trees help keep the water levels cooler in the rivers, which is better for the fish. But while you're doing that, you end up leaving trees there that become nesting habitat areas for bald eagles. But I can't say there's any designated areas. It's just a matter of whether the private or public landowners that own those lands and trees along those rivers look out for the conservation of protecting them. Mary Johnson asked, besides environmental issues, do eagles have live predators in Ohio? Not too many. The eggs or the very young eaglets, raccoons can get up into the trees and maybe get the eggs. Again, you'll have some battles between hawks and stuff. We have seen cases on eagle cams where great horned owls have actually swooped in and taken an eaglet right out of a nest. So, that, yes, could happen. I don't think a coyote is going to catch an eagle by surprise that's feeding on the ground. So I guess I'm going to say either something getting the eggs or, an adult great horned owl can have an effect on the young eaglets in a nest. So Sandra Smith says, I'm lucky to have an active nest that I can see from my living room window. Yes, lucky you. What I have noticed is that after the adults have taught the young to hunt, they then seem to all disappear. Then after what seems like a couple of months, the adults return. Is this normal behavior, and do the young ever return to where they are hatched? So a few things there. Once, after the eaglets have fledged and have started to learn to fly, for a little while there, the adult eagles will bring food back to the nest for them to eat. Once they've taught them how to hunt and they don't have to eat, take the stuff back to the nest, then they will start spreading out. But the other thing is, what's that time of year? All the leaves are out that time of year. So they may still be close to the area, but could be in trees along the rivers, and you can't see them because of the leaves on the trees. So they may still be in the area, but just aren't seeing them around the nest. And then, do the young ever return to where they're hatched? I do believe that sometimes they come back. What I've normally seen is that if a young eagle comes back trying to squeeze a free meal off of mom and dad the next year, the adults will chase them out of the area. They won't let them hang around. So if the young do come back to the same area and try to squeeze a free meal off of mom and dad, they usually get chased out of the area. Curtis Young, any concerns with harmful algal blooms with any of the fish-eating birds? It's a good question. I don't have a good answer to that one, Laura. I don't know if you have any information on that at all.
Yeah, again, since the harmful algal blooms are a relatively recent thing, we don't know what the long-term impacts might be. But yeah, we don't know. But certainly we want to be alert to any potential, that's one reason we monitor the population, is to try to catch if there's any kind of declines in trends, then that might be a possible explanation. So something we'll keep an eye on. And I think there are some researchers who are starting to look into the impacts of these algal blooms on different wildlife species, particularly up on Lake Erie.
Thank you. Good one here from Marcia Freeland. Tuscarawas County, Bradley Heights nest, which can be seen from State Route 460 and 250, seems to be down. She's seen eagles around, but haven't seen them nest building. Does anyone know if they're rebuilding in the same area? Yes, I just got word from another friend of mine who does a lot of bald eagle nest monitoring, just yesterday actually, that he was up in that area, and there seems to be that they are rebuilding fairly close to the sycamore tree that they had been in before. And I think he said it was a little closer to 416. So, and he said there's another place to pull off and watch and see the nest there. And that's one of the nests that I also monitor, but I haven't been up there yet this spring, or this winter, excuse me. see that, but I was just given a report yesterday that they are rebuilding that nest. It seems to be very, very close to the big sycamore tree that it was in before. Good question. Thanks, Marcia. Alona Hoffman. Brad, you mentioned Shocking County nesting areas. Where can I find information about these nests and which ones can be observed from a public area or road? Alana, if you will contact me later, I can give you the, I can give you the information on probably 13 or 14 Shocking County nests. I can give you the specific information on which ones can be seen from public areas and roads, and which ones are on private property that you can't get to. So if you want to reach out to me by phone sometime later, or email me at brad@ohioforest.org, I can help you out with that. Melanie Harris says the accidental killing laws.
She
Not
was talking
exactly.
about wind
Go ahead,
turbine
Laura.
relation to the accident.
As it relates to the wind turbines?
Yes. That was a follow-up from that question we had a question about.
Oh, okay. So Laura, as far as that incidental take on wind turbines, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'll just say it's complicated. Yeah, there's some special sort of permits and such that wind farms can seek to help in situations where, there might be some kind of accidental take of bald eagles. Again, all that stuff has changed recently with all of these changes in laws like the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so certainly I will say that overriding with eagles in particular, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act is still a pretty strong piece of federal legislation. And certainly if something happens to an eagle because of a wind turbine collision, there's going to be some sort of dialogue happening between the Fish and Wildlife Service and the wind company. So I would just say that there's a lot of kind of action at the federal level right now, trying to figure out ways to, first of all, mitigate or prevent eagle killings in the first place, and then if something were to happen, what kind of compensation can the wind companies provide for the loss of that eagle? But certainly there's a lot of other wildlife that are also affected by wind, like bats. Bats are a major species. And so they're still, trying to do lots of research, trying to figure out ways to make it safer for these wildlife, because, wind can be an important way of moving forward in terms of providing our energy needs. So just something that's continuing being worked on, trying to make it safer.
Okay, next one, Melanie Harris. Do eagles see in color or black and white? Laura, you may be able to answer that directly, but I thought they saw in color, and everything I've read is their eyesight is at least 6 times better than human eyesight. So that's why they can not only see fish in the water, but they also can see prey from a lot further away, but more clear than we can.
Correct.
That sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Greg Orr. Well, thank you for the compliment on the presentation. I'm glad you enjoyed it, but also thank you for answering the question about the PFAS effects on animals. Greg states that they're bioaccumulative and that studies indicate that they can cause reproductive and developmental, liver and kidney and immunological effects on lab animals. So they would likely affect fish and eagles. So to the question about the PFAS issues in the Ohio River or other places, yeah, thank you for answering that question for us, Greg. So it does look like they could have effects on fish and eagles through that system. Thank you for that. Mia Shotwell says, how dangerous is the runoff into rivers and streams from the brining of roads in the winter to the fish and eagles? I don't have any direct information on that, Mia. I don't know, Laura, if you do.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions about chemical impacts on the eagles. And again, I guess my answer to that, I mean, that's not an area that we're spending a lot of time researching, but the fact, again, we're doing the population monitoring. The fact that the eagles are doing well is generally an indication that these are not major issues at this point in time, but definitely things we want to keep an eye on. You know, eagles are really important environmental indicators. So definitely things to think about, and certainly the less pollution in the environment, and the better it is for everybody, including us. So yeah, it's important that the eagles, we keep monitoring those just to see if they're an indicator that these are becoming bigger problems or not.
Thanks. Sandy, I'm sure I'll butcher the last name, but I'll say Zaka, says yes, elsewhere also in golden eagles too. So I assume that's back to the PFAS, that it can affect other places in the Ohio River, but also golden eagles as well as bald eagles. I assume that that's either related to that question or the wind turbines, again, one or the other. Thank you for that reply. Brenda Peck, what info do you have on the eagles in Indian Lake area? I don't have any specific information on those. I know there's eagles over there, but that's a good ways outside of my normal range. Laura, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I would suggest, Brenda, if you want to send me an email, I can give you a little more information through email on what's going on over there. And then I think the next question here, the location of the East Lake nest. Yeah, again, I have to look it up, but I could just send me an email and I'll get back with you on that specifically.
Wow, I'm blown away by the questions and the number of people still hanging on after 2 hours and 20 minutes. So I think that clears up the Q&A ones. And I really want to thank Jess Bowen for clearing those as they get answered, because I couldn't keep up with it. But Jess is also looking at the chat. So Jess, I don't know if you have any chat questions that didn't get covered during the Q&A.
Just a few. We covered most of them. So there was a couple of questions about the counties that have few to zero nests. Is if you guys thought that was due to lack of knowledge and reporting or a true absence of eagles.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was probably a combination. Some of those areas, it's especially down in Southeast Ohio, it's very wooded. It's there's less people around, so I think the chances of underreporting are probably pretty high, and harder for us to I don't know, in some ways harder for us to find the nests because it's just forest everywhere. So yeah, I mean, we definitely hope that if people do know of stuff down in those areas that they do report. But yeah, I think that could have been an issue.
And you know, along those same lines, I think that there are even some of the counties where we have high numbers where we say that there's 12 or 13 or 14 nests in some of these other counties. There also could be underreporting there, because in a lot of these counties, there are river areas that there's no good access to view. There's some phenomenal habitat along Wills Creek, the Wahonding River, Kokosi and Mohican rivers and stuff in some of those areas, Killbuck Creek, places that we see a lot of eagle activity, but there's no visibility from the roads, some of these areas. And if it's on private property and it's, you know, not an area that the landowner gets into very often or doesn't care to report if they did find an eagle in those areas, I believe that there's a lot more nests out there that we don't know because there's just no good way to see them.
So then another question was about, you guys talked some about migrating for new nesting sites, but is there any sort of seasonal migration?
Yeah, there is some seasonal migration where the northern birds tend to come south and back north, but a lot of that does have to do with the weather patterns too. On a warm winter, I don't see nearly as many eagles in central Ohio as I do in a cold winter. I mean, I had one of the neat experiences I had was on Dillon Lake back probably 7 years ago, when we had a cold winter, and as the lake was completely frozen over, and as it finally started to unthaw, I could stand in one spot with my binoculars, and without moving the binoculars, I could count 17 eagles in just my binocular view on the ice and in the trees above the ice as they were getting the dead shad and stuff that were in the frozen ice. There were actually 23 eagles there, but I had to move the binoculars to see the other ones that were either flying or perched. And the same thing along Wills Creek, as the river would start to thaw out, and the water below it would be open, we could count 20 eagles in a 2-mile stretch along the river. And that happens in different parts of the state. But these other warmer winters, I don't see those same volumes in those areas because they're not, their patterns have changed.
Okay. More. There was a question about the possibility of ODNR moving the nest next to Port Columbus Airport.
So you're talking about, I wonder if they're talking about the one there on Walnut Creek, right off of the Hamilton Road exit on 270. That one's I know is on the airport, but it's, I don't know.
So yeah, I believe that nest was removed prior to the breeding season last year, and it was definitely a combined effort between DNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and also USDA Wildlife Services. So there was a federal permit issued because of concerns about the eagles potentially colliding with airplanes, which could kill people and do damage to aircraft. So I believe that was removed, again, prior to the nesting season. Like, that's very explicit in that has to be done prior to any eggs or young being in the nest. So I'm not sure what the current status. I think the eagles did try to rebuild after that, and I'm not real sure what happened after that. Yeah, occasionally, it's like with the cell towers, there are, now that we're having so many eagles in the state, now that and because of their tolerance to humans, sometimes they do build nests in areas where it has the potential to affect human safety. So there are allowances made to remove those nests in areas where that could be a problem.
And there was a chat comment that was the nest they were talking about, the one you guys brought up.
Yeah.
So the next question was about if you guys think that the restocking birds that are moving back into Ohio are coming from the north, either the most northern parts of Ohio or Canada.
Well, I don't know if we've got Canadian birds moving across the lake and into this area or not. There's, the spread of the population from Lake Erie down into the rest of the state has been, documented a lot from the bandings and stuff that were done back then, and the patagial tags that were on birds that we could identify and stuff. So I know that I think most of the restocking has been done by, within the ones coming down off of Lake Erie, but it doesn't mean that there haven't been some other ones that have come in from Canada to the northern Lake Erie area and have helped with the genetic population there. I don't know if you got anything else.
The young, like when they're, the immature birds, when they're young, they have the potential to disperse pretty far. And I think we can get influx from southern populations as well. So, I think there can be influx from all sorts of different directions, honestly, at this point, especially with the eagle population in general having recovered well throughout the lower 48.
All right, just a couple more. You guys have done great with the marathon question answer session. There was a question about if turbid, murky, or silt water would inhibit nesting around the area. So I guess kind of murky water, would that turn away the eagles?
Obviously, I think, just the common sense that we go to, the eyesight's got to be better in clear water to find fish and stuff. But I've seen an awful lot of eagles feeding along Wills Creek, which is almost always brown. due to the amount of farming and stuff along it. It just always has a lot of color to it versus some of the other rivers. And there are some nests along that creek, from Cambridge on down, a couple other areas into Tuscarawas, Guernsey, and Coshocton counties. So that's pretty turbid water there, but we're still getting nests along it. So it may have some effect, but I'm not sure how much.
Yeah, I would think it would also depend on what other additional food resources there are in the area. Like if there are a lot of deer carcasses or other good food sources, then it may or may not have an impact.
And again, although we know fish is their main diet, we've seen a lot of eagles that have been more selective to other things because that was the food source available.
Okay, and there was one kind of comment question about they had seen a pair in Jackson County and had wondered if there had been any other sightings in or around Jackson County.
Dave, I think you could answer that question, can't you? Didn't you tell us the other day you saw some?
It's been a few years, but I have seen a bald eagle. I think the pictures I got were in April, but I haven't seen nests. So I'm sure Laura would recommend reporting that. If you want to email it to Laura or go onto the reporting site, that would be awesome. We get it confirmed.
Yep.
And then the last question that I had from the chat was, how can they support your guys' work?
Well, first off, I guess I don't call mine work. Mine's a hobby. It's play. It's something I've been interested in for a long time. But in my case, there's a lot of nests in my part of the country. Again, I'm kind of East Central Ohio. I live now in Muskegon County, but I grew up in Coshocton County for the first 51 years. So most of the areas that I look at are Coshocton, Muskegon, Knox, Guernsey, Holmes, Tuscarawas, Licking. I get up into Ashland once in a while and stuff. So I always like to know what nests and stuff are in those areas to check them out. So I guess if you see something in that area that you think might be new, and again, because I know of most of the nests already in this area, but if you see something you go, oh, that nest wasn't here a year ago, I would appreciate a call or an email, just giving me the opportunity to check that out and keep up to date with what's going on. So that would be all I can say. Laura?
Yeah,
We
I
did have
think
another.
reporting to the reporting website is one great way to help support our, what knowledge we have about eagle distribution throughout the state. And, we're a state agency that most of our funding comes through the sale of hunting and fishing licenses, but there are ways to support our non-game wildlife fund. You can donate to that as well. And that specifically goes to support non-game species like bald eagles and the work we do.
There was one more question that popped in the Q&A from Mia Shotwell. Would offering nesting platforms be a viable effort to mitigate eagles and osprey nesting on cell towers?
I got a couple comments, Laura. I'm sure you do too. So there are a lot of places that are putting up osprey nesting platforms. But for the first time, I've seen where the Army Corps of Engineers put up two very tall nesting platforms near Wills Creek Dam, one on the upflow side, one on the lower side, in hopes of attracting bald eagles to nest there in that area. They went so far as to go ahead and stock a few sticks on them to try to imitate a little bit of a nest just to see if they could. Last year was the first year those platforms were there, and I didn't see any activity there last year, but there's a lot of eagles through that area. So, but those are the only what I'll call eagle platforms that I know of that have been put up specifically for that purpose. But there's a lot of eagle or a lot of osprey platforms that are put up in wetlands and by lakes, and especially lakes and ponds, and that does help with that aspect of it. But I've also seen where the ospreys they're going to build where they want to build. Got a place down near Dresden, Ohio, where there are actually two osprey platforms in a pond, and they've used both of them. And this last year, they took all the sticks off one of those platforms and built a nest on the top of a power pole. I mean, and the power pole was only 100 yards from the platform nest that they've been using. So that's what I've seen. Laura, I don't know if you know any more about any other eagle platforms.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head here in the state about eagle platforms. Generally, I think the ospreys take to the platforms a little more readily than the eagles do. Plus, the eagle nests are just substantially larger. So to finding a good structure and arrangement for the eagle nest is a little more challenging. But that's a good question. I think something, you know, since the cell tower thing has become more of an issue here recently, I think still some research trying to figure out the best way to mitigate that issue is warranted. I know we've been having some conversations recently about the osprey cell tower situation. So I think that's something that look for some more discussion and potentially guidance coming up here in the near future.
Wow.
Dave, do we have any more questions, or we?
I think we might be caught up. I'm still amazed we have 60 people still on, but I really appreciate all the information from Laura and Brad, and especially the audience and their interaction. I think we broke all kinds of records, not only with attendance, but with the interaction number of questions submitted. So, and then I think one of my favorites today was Nancy in the comment says, thanks for a great morning. We needed encouraging news. So that might be a good way to wrap things up. I do want to let everybody know that we will post the recordings and some additional information, some of the links. So I'll have Brad and Laura send me the pertinent links and I'll post it all on that site, all in one nice location. I think I will break off the question and answer session into a second recording so that they won't be so large. So you'll have two opportunities, one to see the actual presentation and then one to see the Q&A session if you'd like to see that as well. So again, thanks everybody. And it is Friday, the weekend's coming. Hopefully we'll get some sun. So try to take some time to spend part of your day out in the woods. And with that, I'm going to shut off the recording here.